Thank you. Welcome to StarTalk Live at the Keswick Theater. All right. I am Neil deGrasse Tyson, your personal astrophysicist, and I always do this with a co-host. My co-host tonight is going to be and is Chuck Nice. Chuck, where are you, man?
What's up, buddy?
Chuck Nice.
What's up, Philly?
Some of you know Chuck is a Philly native.
That's right. Born and bred, Philadelphia. That's why I know we're not actually in Philadelphia. But it doesn't really work when you walk out like, "What's up, Glenside?"
Yeah, that wouldn't work. That wouldn't work. So, Chuck.
Yeah, man.
So I think we're in Philadelphia.
It's very cool.
StarTalk is about science, right?
I did not know that.
So I thought to myself, let's talk about like a cool, important, interesting scientist who we associate with Philadelphia.
Will Smith.
Is he from Philadelphia?
He is from Philly, West Philadelphia, born and raised from what I hear. And he's a slapologist.
No. We're going to talk about perhaps Philadelphia's most famous scientist, which many other people think of him as just a founding father. Of course, we're talking about Benjamin Franklin. All right. So let's get started. So, Chuck, what do you know about Benjamin Franklin?
Oh, man, I know he's got a parkway. I know he's got a bridge. I know he got an institute. I know he's on a $100 bill. Exactly. Oh, man. Yeah, it's all about...
You look at this like you've never seen 100. Do we not pay you enough?
Let me tell you something. I can't even talk anymore. That's how much I love money and Ben Franklin. Yeah.
No, so that's good. So we associate him, at least in the scientific community, with his discoveries on electricity.
Of course.
Okay, and electricity and lightning. I got a lot to say about lightning. People think they understand lightning, but usually they don't, even if they think so. Because, lightning strikes from the ground up, not from the clouds to the ground. Did you know that?
Yeah, tell that to every Greek painting that I've seen.
But what else? Ben Franklin was a printer, okay?
That's right.
And he printed, and people don't know this, Chuck, you come from a printer family.
And every printer in the world loves Ben Franklin. I love Ben Franklin because my father was a printer, and if it weren't for Ben Franklin, I would have starved as a child.
No, but you worked in the printing factory with him.
With my dad, yes. And I actually ran something called a raised letter press, which is what he pretty much invented. Yeah.
Okay, all right. And Ben Franklin was also a successful businessman. He did so many things, and I don't have particular expertise on this.
Okay.
I'm just saying. So we got to do this StarTalk style, and we combed the landscape for an expert on Benjamin Franklin. You know where we landed? At the Yale Library, which is undergoing a multi-year project to collect the complete papers of Benjamin Franklin.
Wow.
So we got the editor-in-chief of that project here today. Please give a warm Philly welcome to Ellen Cohen, editor-in-chief of the Benjamin Franklin Papers Project.
Ellen
Where
Cohen!
Is she? There she goes. Ellen Cohen. Ellen, go ahead, please have a seat. Ellen.
This is what makes this show so great. We just cheered for a librarian. There's nothing better in the world than that, okay?
Except here's the thing, I'm not a librarian.
Okay, like I said, we just cheered for an editor-in-chief.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, Ellen, you're editor-in-chief of this project. Benjamin Franklin was prolific, so this means it's a big project.
Yep.
And how long have you been at this? Okay, sorry. Okay. No, how long, how do we, how long?
Since I was in diapers,
Yeah, okay, yeah.
no, we're talking 40 years.
40 years.
Yes.
And that got you through how far in his life?
Well, look, here's the thing. We started our project back in 1954. And the idea was to collect every single thing that we could find around the world that Benjamin Franklin wrote, and also everything that he received. So it's both sides of the correspondence. And, you know, when he invented lightning, we're only like in volume 4. And I just handed in volume 44 to the Yale Press.
Wow.
Thank you, it was a really tough volume. And in all, there are going to be 47. I mean, this guy was amazing, and about half of those volumes covers the period when he was in France during the Revolution.
And so how much of that did you, we think of him as a founding father, and nowhere on the $100 bill is there any, is there any indication that he was a scientist?
Yeah.
So what percent of his papers and his body of work reflects his capacity as a scientist in all of that correspondence?
Well, you know, here's the amazing thing about him is that his entire life he was interested in science. He was so curious about everything that he saw.
As any good scientist should be. Okay.
So, like,
It's not like you're going to find too many scientists who are like, what's that?
That's right.
like, just to give you an example, how many people of his day, or how many of you, have ever sat in a darkened room with a fire going in the fireplace, and there's a candle on the table? Now, Benjamin Franklin noticed that the smoke from that candle was traveling in a certain direction. And he thought, that's interesting. And he made it his business to try to find out why. I mean, that's the kind of guy he was his entire
Oh, so if it was
life.
a lit candle. Yes, I'm sorry, I did to, like, why would the candles start floating through the air? Okay, so he's saying normally the smoke of a candle would go straight up. He's got a fireplace going, and now the smoke is going towards the fire. So he notices this and asks himself what's going on.
What's going on?
That's an observant, curious person.
Yeah.
Yes,
And-
because all I would have thought is, why am I here alone? This setting is very, very sexy.
Wait, so he didn't, so something I never knew, I know a little bit about Ben, but he didn't study science in school?
So here's the thing. This kid was the 15th child
Oh.
in a family of 17 children.
Wow. His poor mother.
His poor mother's.
Mothers?
Well, that is to say, he only
First
had,
of all, I don't need you bringing that kind of stuff into my school system. Next thing you be up here talking about your Ben Franklin critical race theory.
I don't think she meant he was raised by two mothers.
Oh, okay.
I'm pretty sure that's not the...
Yeah, that's
Okay.
it. Oh, my goodness gracious. I walked right into that one.
Well,
Yeah.
so, I don't know if you know, I have some expertise in the fabric of the space-time continuum. Did you know this?
Yes.
Yeah. Did you know this too? Yeah, okay. So,
Also, I have a watch. So there.
So I was experimenting on this, and I was able to open a portal through time,
Right.
and I got Benjamin Franklin.
And I'm starting to get a little worried, to be honest, right
Okay.
now. Because what I know is Neil does not smoke marijuana.
So I brought him through, and then I said, why don't I just bring him here? And so then I got in an Uber, and he didn't. And so I lost him.
Neil and Ben's not so excellent adventure.
Because I would be fun if we had Ben Franklin here. But I don't know where he is. He's wandering the streets of Philadelphia.
Yeah, well, here's what you don't know. I would think that was like a fantastical story, except that I actually found Ben Franklin. I found him standing on the street just staring at some electrical wires. And then when I asked him, what are you doing? He was like, I'm not looking at the wires. This is Philly. I'm looking at them shoes. Why would anybody put shoes up on a wire? Was it a tightrope artist who fell? And that is all that is left of him? What exactly happened here?
A tightrope artist. Yeah, wow. Yeah, I never thought to think that.
Yeah.
But if I came from another time, yeah, that's what I
You might think of that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But really, it's just some brother walking around without sneakers because he ran into the wrong people in Philly. The only city where they don't steal your shoes. They throw them up on the wire so that you can look at them every day. Yeah, man, those were my shoes.
Wait, can we get back to Ben Franklin?
Ben Franklin.
Okay.
Ben Franklin.
Wait,
I'm serious about Ben Franklin.
So, did you bring him here?
I thought by now Ben Franklin. Ben! Ben!
You're very kind.
Benjamin Franklin.
kind.
It was
Thank
just
you.
an Uber I was getting into. You didn't have to be afraid of
You
it.
just wandered off. You left me just standing there.
Can we get Ben a chair, please? Do we have?
You're too kind. How do you do, Ellen? It's nice to see you.
Thank you.
How do you do,
Good to
young
see you
sir?
again, Ben.
Good to see you as
How
well.
are you?
I'm very well. I'm excellent well. You're very kind to ask. Nice to see you all, my friends. Good evening. Thank you. You're very kind. You're too kind.
So Ben,
Neil.
You got a chance to see? What do you think of Philadelphia today? Wait, don't take my money.
I thought that was... I'm sorry.
You don't even know what this is.
Time is money.
That is legal tender, Ben, with your face on it.
Did he not? He said it had my face on it, I think.
Yeah, it's totally there on your face. Yeah. So tell me, what do you think of Philly today?
It's enormous. It's wonderful how much it's expanded. When I had come to Philadelphia as a runaway from Boston, it was a town of only maybe 6,000, 5,000, 6,000 people.
Wow.
1776, Philadelphia had become the largest city in the new colonies, perhaps with 60,000 people, perhaps at most. It was only at that time, I think, at that time there was only one city in the world with over 1 million people. That would be Beijing. London perhaps was well on its way. But I've certainly never seen a city with millions and millions of people together.
Wow, okay.
And back then, did the traffic suck as much as it does now?
The roads were in terrible condition during the Pennsylvania Convention. While we had to cover all the roads with gravel because it was making the carriage wheels would make so much noise on the cobblestone, and it was a tripping hazard. You don't want to be in a cobblestone city.
So Ben, you were a successful printer. In fact, from what I've read, you were quite wealthy. So is that wealth give you free time to then do cool science things? Because I don't think anyone was paying you to do science.
That is true. No, that would be the purview of a gentleman. You're absolutely right. I did have some success with my printing, specifically with my almanac. Did very well.
Poor Richard's Almanac?
Poor Richard's Almanac, and it's...
Wait, let me ask Al, who the hell is Poor Richard?
Well, Poor Richard is a character Franklin made up. He, in Philadelphia, he just had to make a buck. He had to make a living, and he saw that almanacs sold really well. And so he wanted to make one himself. And he, in fact, was such a cutthroat competitor. His almanac was funnier, wittier, it just obliterated the competition because he created this character called Richard Saunders.
Poor Richard.
And Richard Saunders, in the preface to the first almanac, says, "Kind reader, I'm an honest fellow, but I got this wife back home who's really like hammering on me to make more money. And so to please her, I'm doing this almanac because I know they sell really well. And I never, ever would have done this if it hadn't been for the fact that Titan Leeds, the other almanac maker in town,
Far more popular than me at the time.
that Titan Leeds, we know from predictions in the almanac that he's going to die on a certain day.
Wow.
And he also, because he's a great predictor of things, he also knows he's going to die on a certain day, but we differ about which day it's going to be. And so, although I'm a good friend of his, I thought maybe now's the time for me to get into it. Well, Titan Leeds had no intention of dying. And when he read that, he went nuts. And he went hopping around town saying, I'm not, unlike you, I'm not dead. I'm not dead. And there was such excitement, and Franklin just outmaneuvered him in every way. And before you know it, his leads just folded and his almanacs flew off the shelf. But here's a connection to science. As soon as Franklin's almanacs became really popular, he was able to add more pages to them because everybody was buying them. And what did he do? He starts putting articles in there about science. He took articles that had come over from London and he would reprint them in the almanac because it wasn't enough for him to learn about these amazing things. He wanted to educate everybody about them.
So what is the Junto Society? Does that have
Well,
science?
so after having published the almanac for a number of years, at the age of 42, I was able to retire and sell my business, and I would never have to work again. And this is when I had begun.
At age 42?
At age 42.
Wow.
And this is when I began the pursuit, seriously, of science. But earlier, I had been in London when I was 19, and I had seen other clubs, the TIFF Club, the Tuesday Club, and I had created a club when I was a working man in Philadelphia called the Junto, with other like-minded working men. Eventually, we were joined by ship's captains, and together, Junto, of course, being Latin for joined together. Junta jucant.
Yeah, I knew that.
Joined together, they assist. Joined together, they assist. And so together with the Junto, with this club of like-minded people, we were able to better ourselves, better our community, and eventually we together founded the first library, subscription library here in America, which still exists today, and the first science academy, the American Philosophical Society, which still exists in your day.
I was recently inducted as a member to the American
Congratulations.
Philosophical Society. In fact, they are based here in Philadelphia, and that's how I found out. They told me about you, yes.
Neil is like the Black Ben Franklin.
No, well, but
Well, they have a number of my little improvements and my
of course, but
rattle traps.
What I'm asking is, you create this, you create that, and at no time have we yet even talked about Ben Franklin as a diplomat. And that's how most of anyone thinks about you as a founding father. So how did you have time for all of this?
Well,
Time machine.
Time is, it requires concentration and a schedule. I have a certain mathematical attitude towards time, just as I have to everything. For instance, if one wants to live a good and virtuous life, one must create a moral compass or moral algebra. If one is to have enough time to do everything one wishes to accomplish, one must allot the time, and one must devote the time to it. And so I created a very rigid schedule, which for the most part, until much later in my life, I stuck to and allowed myself to wake at a certain time, to prepare my letters at a certain time, to devote a certain amount of time. I also became
I
rather
believe
obsessive.
that the translation of what Ben is trying to say is, we did not have the internet.
Yeah.
I was not.
Or Netflix, right?
Right,
So
or Netflix.
At night.
And we certainly did not chill, ever.
But nothing is done in a vacuum. I am working alongside, I'm inspired by so many greater men and working alongside so many other great minds.
So Ellen, from your records, when did Ben transition from the bringer of science to people to the doer of science? When was that?
Well, one of the first things that he did in a scientific realm in America, I think, was.
By the way, if you don't know, we can find out because he's sitting right here. But
The
yeah.
transit,
I'm
the study of the transit, is that what you're thinking?
Well, go ahead. You
No, please. You've read my letters more recently than I have.
No, talk about the transit.
Well, the transit of Venus, Neil, you probably know more
Indeed,
about
the
this.
transit of Venus is a very important.
Did you have
phenomenon.
you probably had a chance to study it in your lifetime
Yes,
as
so
well.
Venus, twice every couple of hundred years, will move between Earth's vista on the sun and the sun itself. And that, when observed from different parts of the Earth, enable you to triangulate and get a precise distance to Venus. When you do that, it allows you to get the full measurement of the entire solar system, where the distances to all the planets, because previously you got distances just in units of the Earth-Sun distance, but you didn't know exactly how far that was.
Exactly.
So everything was in unit of Earth-Sun, but the transit of Venus transforms that. And you would have seen the transit of Venus in the 1780s, is that
Well,
right?
so in 1761, we have one, and unfortunately I'm not able to see it, but we begin to see it studied. Also in 1761, there's war taking place that's going to interfere. But I think it's in 1769 that we are able to participate globally. So we have Mason and Dixon studying it.
Yeah,
we
yeah.
have David Rittenhouse creating a telescope
Yeah.
and studying it not far from here in Narton. We build an observatory just behind the Pennsylvania State House, and some years later, the Declaration of Independence will be read out loud from that same platform, where we will track and study and time the transit of Venus in order to come up with this final number that will finally give us the distance between the sun and the Earth.
Yeah.
And we came up with the number of 90 million miles.
That was so wrong. It's 93.
Yeah.
It's 93 million miles.
We were
Ben,
very wrong.
Ben, get back to the drawing board.
That's
And-
correct.
Your life has been wasted, sir.
It was an absolute failure.
Before we take our first break, let me just bring this to, I think, an interesting close. That transit of Venus was also viewed by Captain Cook.
Captain Cook.
On an expedition from England. And that was best viewed from the South Pacific. And so England says,
Go to the
Captain Cook, go to the South Pacific. Here are new tools to measure the transit of Venus. Oh, by the way, could you map every coastline you see? Whatever landmass you hit, give it just on the side. Go ahead and do that. He measures the transit of Venus brilliantly, comes back to England, presents the maps of Australia, New Zealand, the Cook Islands, all of this, and within decades, England takes ownership of those land masses.
Right.
Just take a look at all the flags of those countries, Okay? Half of them have the Union Jack inserted in it. That's traceable to
Not
Captain
still.
Cook. Many of them do still.
Have they learned nothing?
Have- We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to delve deeper into Professor Franklin's scientific career on StarTalk Live at the Keswick Theater. All right, we're back. Keswick Theater. StarTalk Live. We're outside of Philadelphia, and who better to talk about is one of its finest, most significant citizens of the past, and I would say even the present day. His spirit energy remains with us in this part of the world, and I would say around the world itself.
You're very kind.
Benjamin Franklin. Give up for
Yeah!
Benjamin Franklin. And of course, Ellen Cohn, who is the editor-in-chief of the Benjamin Franklin Papers Project, which is being conducted out of the Yale Library.
Yes.
So Ben, let's talk about your most famous experiment, which I, as a kid, didn't understand, and I still don't.
Fair enough.
What's up with you and a kite and a key?
Ah, yes, electricity.
What the hell were you doing? Why? What? Don't you know it's dangerous?
Oh, I do know that it's. I didn't. That's why I did not fly the kite in the storm.
That's
my
the
son-
legend.
I stood in a little paddock, and my son William flew the.
Oh.
If you're going to perform,
Father of the year there. That's
if you're going to perform a dangerous experiment, may I always suggest placing your progeny in. They can't sue you, mostly because they can't sue you.
Okay. So what was your objective there?
So, we're working with the American Philosophical Society. We're doing experiments. I have retired, and I am corresponding with a friend in England at the Royal Society, Peter Collinson, and he sends me a wonderful new invention from the University of Leiden, known as a Leiden jar. Normally, these sort of inventions, these innovations would have been named after the creator, but in this case, the creator was a Professor Musselbach. I don't think anyone's going out and buying a Musselbach jar, so we called it a Leiden jar. And so Peter sends me one of these, and he says, perhaps you'd like to consider understanding how it works, learn how it functions. And we begin by, would you like to describe?
Well, so the Leiden
what a
jar,
Leiden
as I remember from my physics training, it's a jar that's sort of electrically insulated from what's around it, but there are metal sheets inside of it
Aluminium.
that if they become charged, they just sort of resist each other, and you see them just sort of separated, sitting there, perfectly happy, separated.
That's
kind of opposite what gravity would otherwise have them do. So in a way, it has trapped electricity in this volume.
That's right. And what I'm going to do is take a dozen of them, 18, and put them in a box and wire them all together and create, instead of just producing electrical fluid by rubbing a piece of wool on a glass tube, I'm going to create an electrostatic generator, an enormous machine. And now I'm going to have rows. So imagine, if you will, rows and rows of these jars all sticking up. I won't take your water. Just imagine. And now I can store quantities of the electrical fluid in it. And it is rows and rows of these jars sticking out of a box, as if, to me, it appears like a row of fowling pieces or cannons sticking out of the top of a balustrade. And do you know what we call that?
A battery.
a cannon sticking out of a balustrade?
A battery.
A battery.
Yes.
And that is what we're going to do. We're going to try and invent and name the battery.
Okay.
And we're going to once again fail, but it is going to
Got to start somewhere, Ben.
but it's going to inspire me to perform, I don't know, Ellen, 130 separate experiments. And eventually, it will lead us to the understanding that it will lead us to many understandings. It will lead us to, most importantly, it will give us a vocabulary, a language, a nomenclature for studying this new fluid.
So
Is that why you needed the kite and the key?
Well, so ultimately, the kite and the key is going to prove the final experiment, which is that one form of this electrical fluid is the discharge of lightning. And we're going to take some electrical charges
from the sky.
Not from a lightning bolt, that would be in lunacy, and we're going to put it into one of these capacitors.
Okay.
We're going to take it back to our laboratory. We're going to perform a series of experiments with it, just how quickly can it burn a piece of paper? How quickly can it? And then we'll take another battery filled with electrical fluid created from a generator, and it will perform exactly the same way. Therefore, we will prove that these two seemingly different substances are in fact the exact same thing.
And at any time in this experiment, does it get you back to the future?
Apparently so. I would have said no.
So just to put us on the same page, every time it rains anywhere in the world, there are electrons that used to be up in the sky, in the clouds, that have arrived on Earth. And electricity doesn't like being imbalanced that way. All right? These are from ions that come out of the rain-swelled skies. And so the electrons collect. Now, if you happen to be under a thunderstorm, there'll be a lot of those electrons collecting locally. The electrons want to get back to the cloud, but they're really lazy, okay? And the last thing it wants to do is move through air, because air is actually an electrical insulator, all right? It hates moving through the air. So, when you build up enough charge, the charges look around and say, wait a minute, I see a human being. Let me go up into the human being. Now I have 5.5 less feet I have to move through the air. Oh, wait a minute, there's a tree. Let's go higher up, okay? There's less air that I have to move through. Wait a minute, there's a church steeple. Let's go up to the tip of the church steeple, and we will discharge there. And so lightning, there's what's called a leader stroke that is exploring what path between the sky and the ground requires the least stress on the movement of these electrons. It finds the path, it's called a leader stroke. In the moment that leader stroke completes, the electrons surge back to the cloud, and that is the lightning bolt that we all see, that most people think comes from the cloud to the ground. But it's the electrons that had accumulated going from the ground back up to the clouds. Now,
So you died because of a bunch of lazy electrons.
yes. Right. So if you're the tallest one in an area, you are susceptible. Okay? Anytime lightning hits a baseball game, who does it hit?
The tallest one.
No, we can do better than that. The pitcher.
Up on a.
The pitcher is just a little bit closer on the pitcher's mound. And that leader stroke, the moment it comes out, you actually will feel the static electricity. So if you feel your hair rising up because you start accumulating these extra charges, if you start feeling the hair rise up on your skin, drop to the ground immediately. Because what's happening is the electrons are gathering and they're ready to make that jump, they're ready to jump. But if you drop low in that instant, then you will confound this exercise.
Oh my God, where do we go?
Then
You know, I'm just sitting here trying to be a lazy electron. I don't understand. What just happened?
So, just a little bit of and by the way, when they launch rockets, you ever notice there's the launch pad in the middle, and there are 4 towers. There are multiple towers. There's a water tower as well for other reasons. But there are 4 towers that compete with the rocket to attract lightning. So if lightning if the electrons are ready to come up and go back to a cloud, the rocket is not their first choice because we've supplied them with a way to go back. And this reminds me of one of Professor Franklin's most brilliant inventions, the lightning rod.
Yeah.
Yes.
Dude,
So
you did good there.
thank you. And in fact, Ellen would know better than I. There is a French natural philosopher who is able to attract charges during a bright sunshine. We see at the time that I'm in France, the Italian Signore Volta expanding on these ideas.
Yeah, so the Italians, the electricity has an imprint of all the people who were fundamental to its progress. So Alexandre Volta is the Volt is named after him. Not the Chevy car, I'm talking about the volts of your battery. There's ampere. Amps come from, I think ampere is French, ampere. So all of these names and terms come, there's even there's a Faraday, there's but all these words we have for electricity, like you were saying, Professor.
Doctor.
Say again?
I was never a professor.
Okay.
You can just call me Ben.
Ben.
Just Ben.
As we were saying, Ben, that, I can't call you Ben, that's too...
Behind my back, the other members of the Constitutional Convention called me Dr. Fatsides.
Really?
I,
They were
That's what I'm gonna call you
It
then.
wasn't even the worst insult among us. I
Ben,
prefer Ben.
Today, we don't body shame people that
Thank
way.
you so
right.
much.
Yes.
So yes, Ben will be suitable.
So with the lightning rod, you now give the electrons a place to depart Earth so that they don't randomly find some other thing like a church steeple and destroy the church steeple.
And in Boston, they kept tearing down the lightning rods for fear that I was, they believed, from the pulpit, suggesting that I was somehow creating an accumulation of electrical fire.
So I left something out, excuse me. So
Please.
the lightning rod is so brilliant. It may have been more brilliant than Ben knew because, watch what happens. So you have the lightning rod, which is just a piece of metal sticking up, and it's the highest point of your structure, all right? So the electrons gather. If you make the lightning rod a point,
This is important.
then the electrons, on going to that point, ready to go to the cloud, they'll leak off, and they'll just sort of drizzle off into the sky. So lightning rods not only reduce the chance you'll get struck by lightning, if you're struck by lightning, it saves you from destruction.
But this was a very important argument at the time. The debate over a dull-topped lightning rod versus a very sharp point was something we took very seriously.
All the electrons crowding there, they spill out. It's very crowded, and you can spill electrons back and basically never have the lightning strike that would have otherwise taken place. It's just brilliant. Now, let me ask you, Ellen, I heard this, and I just want verification. I want to see if you have it. Before the lightning rod, by the way, this is the 1760s, 70s. What's the tallest structure in any city in colonial America? Church, okay? So what structure is most likely to be hit by lightning first? Church. So if there's a church here and a church there and a church there, and that church gets hit by lightning, I got a story. In my church, right? They say,
That was the false church, people.
yep, that was the false god.
Clearly, God didn't like your church.
Didn't like your church. Good way for me to get more churchgoers into my church by holding that argument. But then Ben comes along and saves all the churches. I heard that there was criticisms, I don't know if it was heresy, of Ben thwarting the will of God.
Right. Which is
Exactly.
why we had to help it along with something called Jesus arson.
Jesus arson? What's
Because Ben put up these lightning rods, these churches aren't burning down, and God told me to just burn your church down.
Wait, so
That was not my intention.
wait. So Ben, for me, the idea that you would be accused of heresy for thwarting the will of God, I'm thinking to myself, how powerful is the God you're worshiping if Mr. Fatso can prevent them from destroying your church? This is my thought. So, is there any correspondence related to this?
Oh, he got immense criticism from people all over America and Europe too. Most people believed that lightning was God.
Of course, divine.
Was divine.
Not just in modern religion, but you go back to
Zeus.
ancient religions. Zeus, did Thor wield the lightning bolt or just a hammer?
No, Thor called on lightning. He called down lightning with his hammer.
With his hammer. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
And I got that from Marvel.
Okay.
Now, you know what else? Inside churches throughout Europe, there weren't just people inside there. You know what else they used to store in churches?
The parts of dead saints.
Gunpowder.
Oh, that's smart.
Delft.
Yeah, you know that place that just keeps catching fire for some reason more than any other place? You know what we said? Let's put some gunpowder there.
What?
Well, just only, 20 years before I was born, 20 years or so, 30 years, was the Great Fire of London, 1666, not too
Yeah.
long. So this
And
was
what did
very
they
much
keep
on
in their
people's
churches?
minds.
Dynamite?
No, because these
But
were
dynamite was invented by Alfred Nobel much later.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I don't spend that much time in
Clearly, I
churches.
did not know that.
It's where he made his money to leave the trust that would give the Nobel Prizes. Yeah, dynamite, TNT.
That's
Yeah.
somewhat disturbing, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah.
That the
okay.
man who created the stuff that blows things up also made the Peace Prize.
You have to give a prize for peace?
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, we need that. Otherwise,
It's unfortunate.
there may be even less incentive than there otherwise would be to create peace in the world. Ben, before we take a break, I want to get to your other experiments. But tell me what other critiques that were handed down?
Well, one of the ways that Franklin countered this argument was to say, God sends rain, and that doesn't keep us from putting roofs over our heads.
Brilliant. Ben, that was good. Ben, that was good. Look at him. He said, yeah, that was me.
No, I was thinking you made me
I love
think
it. He
of-
was like, that was me.
I don't remember how clever I was. I sound even better when Ellen tells me.
In the middle of the summertime, the sun is really strong. That doesn't prevent us from carrying parasols. So why should it be that if the deity gives us the knowledge to understand these phenomenon, then why shouldn't we take advantage of that knowledge to protect ourselves?
I'll tell you why, because the next thing you'll be telling me is that I need to get vaccinated, okay? That's why.
As a
My
matter of
body,
fact,
my choice.
Wait, Ben, what's this oil and water thing you did?
Ellen, would you like to tell them about?
Like a bead of water spreading out on
Yes.
Yeah, so here's the thing. Even from the earliest age, Franklin, being the observant kid he was and young man, as he was crossing the ocean back and forth, he noticed that when the cooks dumped the cooking oil overboard, the waves smoothed out. Why is that? Why is that? He kept on thinking about it. And much later, when he was living in England, he thought, he was talking to people about this phenomenon, and he said, I'm going to do an experiment. He took a little bit of oil, and he carried it to a pond that he
From my
knew
cave.
about. And, thank you. And he put the oil on the surface of the pond on a windy day to see what would happen. And to his amazement, because no one ever expected this, the oil smoothed out the water. It became smooth as glass, but it didn't stop there. That smooth area kept going and going and going until to everybody's amazement, half an acre of water was absolutely flat. And so
Covered by a tiny bit of oil introduced to it.
Thin.
a teaspoonful of oil.
He would have loved Exxon.
Well, but you know, in our time there was practical applications for this. Oyster divers would put a little bit of oil, and it would allow them to see their catch.
Oh, because
through
otherwise the turbulent water disrupts the optics
Yes.
of what's below. And when I first heard this, I say, what? Oh, I get it, all right. So if you ever freshly wax a car and you put a bead of water on it, it just sort of stays there, sort of propped up, all right? So that's called surface tension. And so water has pretty good surface tension. It'll just sort of stay there as a bead. You put too much water there, it'll spill off, but just a little bit of water will stay as a bead. If you do that with oil, oil has very low surface tension, so it won't bead up. You put the oil there, it'll just spread.
It's like a lazy electron.
It'll just spread. And what we would learn after the fact, because of this brilliant experiment, because it's not only what do you see that intrigues you, it's what do you do that creates more things to be intrigued by, that the oil, under the right conditions, would spread to 1 molecule thick. And so you can calculate the size of the molecule based on the volume of your teaspoon and how much area it ended up covering. It's just brilliant.
That is brilliant.
And that was the experiment that was done based on Franklin's observations and his writing up that experiment. At his time, they didn't understand the composition of a molecule. They didn't have the word for molecule.
Yeah.
I don't know what a molecule
But
is.
not long after he
You
died.
had elements, but you didn't have atoms. Atoms
right.
were not understood. Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was the seminal experiment that got other people thinking about how that could be used to measure the thickness of a molecule.
Ben, this requires very high standards of measurement, and you have to be careful about your own bias that could influence the result, because then someone else will check your results, and if you find out you didn't take the notes right, that would look bad on your reputation.
That's right.
So,
Well, there is nothing more inspiring than when you have an experiment that fails but can inspire another scientist to improve upon it and
what's
find
more
greater
inspiring
truth.
than that is doing an experiment that succeeds.
Oh, well, that would, clearly I have very little experience with that.
No, but you're absolutely right. The null experiment can make a very interesting starting point for others. So, given that you're in it, you're doing it, what did you have tolerance for? I don't know what word you might have had in the day. Today we would call it pseudoscience, or people in denial of science, people who did not see, care, or appreciate what the scientific methods would do. Did you have any sense of that
There's
world?
so much of this. And of course, you must understand we're living in an age where new ideas are being introduced, and it's sometimes very hard to determine which ideas are true or not. I cannot think of, can you think of an example of a pseudoscience from my age? Have I put you on the spot?
No.
Just nothing pops into my mind right away. Oh,
But what was your attitude towards it? Let me ask that.
not good.
Okay.
Well, a perfect example, we mentioned the almanacs. I'm trying to, all of the calculations I did for my astronomical
Right, the
charts.
sun, moon, and stars, yeah.
I'm doing all of that. Well, and also we would do Mercury rise.
Okay.
I worked closely with scientists who started to study and trace what would eventually become known as Uranus. And this, I think,
Uranus, we say.
Uranus, thank you.
Yeah, not Uranus,
Uranus.
but Uranus.
Uranus,
yeah, okay.
very
Right.
good.
Yeah.
Very good. But that would the discovery would come later. But no, but this, of course, was why we would need a library to have these. I mean, it comes back over and over to Pliny, to
Pliny, an
Newton.
early documenter of all knowledge.
Yes.
Yeah.
Newton, who I never had a chance to meet, but would have been, in my time, these great inspirations. These are doing the best science. When we fail, we hope to inspire others. When we see people who are simply projecting their own bias or their own religious beliefs, like the idea that electricity gathered with a lightning rod will cause earthquakes. That would be a pseudoscience of my age that was very common.
Interesting.
Well, here's an example. There was a guy during Franklin's lifetime who published an article saying, "I've invented a pair of shoes that can allow me to walk across the River Seine." Now,
That seemed to be easy to test.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, you don't need a grant from the National Science Foundation.
By the way, if you buy those shoes, you deserve to be ripped off and maybe even drown.
well, you know, society was filled with people who were trying to make money off of a uneducated, credulous public. And that was one of the reasons why Franklin, at every turn, tried not only to do his own experiments and hold himself to those kind of standards you're talking about, but also educate other people so that they wouldn't fall prey to the kind of nonsense that sounded good if you said it with the right kind of authority. He hated that.
Yeah, none of that happens today.
No.
But at the same time, imagine, for example, that someone tells you that they have recently witnessed a man leave the earth and float 7,000 feet, 7,000 feet above the city of Paris.
Yeah.
That might seem unlikely, and yet this was something I witnessed in my lifetime, the first hot air balloon. So we are living in a time of what
Yeah,
seems
it's a
to
little
be
different than a man floating up from the ground.
No,
Ben.
no, it's really.
Sorry, Ben, I'm just letting you know.
It's lighter than air. It is.
Yeah, but it's a balloon. Like, it's still a
But
balloon.
the first time you see it.
Like, no, if you just took off flying right now, I'd be like, whoa,
Well,
that is something.
Ha-
But if you jump in a balloon, I'll be like, oh, look at that, he's in a balloon.
But you've never seen a balloon before.
Oh.
Well, except as a toy, a children's
Okay, that
toy.
makes sense, yeah.
So when the Montgolfier.
I forgot, you've been dead a long time. We all seen balloons. Nobody here is impressed by a balloon.
So, Ellen, what you're saying, not to put words in your mouth, you're saying in that time, there's a lot of challenges and issues communicating objective scientific truth to a public that is otherwise gullible in many ways, and that's kind of no different from what we're seeing today.
Yes. Today we call it the Nigerian prince. Hi, I just need some money that you can give me for just a little bit, and then I will give you back 10 times as much.
Wait, Chuck, weren't those in emails from 20 years ago?
No, it was an email from Tuesday.
What's in
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to find out what Ben was doing in France during the Revolutionary War, when StarTalk Live from the Keswick Theater continues. We're back, StarTalk Live, Keswick Theater! I got Chuck Nice, my co-host. I've got Ellen Cohn, editor-in-chief of the Benjamin Franklin Papers Project up at Yale in New Haven. And we've got none other than Ben Franklin himself.
Good
Thank
evening.
you, Ben,
Good
for
evening.
coming out for this. So we know that the American colonies were very friendly with France through Jefferson and through the diplomacy of Ben Franklin. And of course, while we're fighting England, the French are always looking for a good fight against England anyway. So they were sympathizers to our cause. And very shortly after our revolution, they had theirs, right? So I'm going to ask you, what brought Ben to France? And what was he doing there while in residence?
Well, actually, it was not at all a given that France was going to help the American colonies. Not at all.
We are not sure if we want to help you, colonists. You do not have the hard French soap. You smell like peasants.
Chuck, does every French person you imitate smoke a cigarette?
This is what we do. We were born with cigarettes in our hands.
Okay. Continue. Never mind Chuck on the corner there. Okay, go.
So when the Patriots gathered and wrote the Declaration of Independence and pledged that they would risk their lives on this cause, the question was, how are we going to win this war? I mean, it's one thing to declare a war. It's another thing to fight a war when you don't have guns, you don't have ammunition, you don't have any place to go and buy tools. The colonies relied on England for everything. And now all of a sudden, not only did they declare their independence, they're cut off from their supplier. So they sent Benjamin Franklin to France to try to persuade the King of France to support a revolution against another king. Now that was not gonna play necessarily, because kings kind of like...
Yo, kings rule with kings. Real recognize real.
Okay.
So why did they choose Franklin to do this mission that was in fact not at all a sure thing? The reason was that by the time 1776 rolled around, he was already by far the most famous man in America. Why? Because of his lightning experiments.
His science.
His science. And it wasn't just that the lightning rod saved millions of lives, and it wasn't just that he invented the battery. Most people considered the most significant thing about his experiments to be that he proved that something that was invisible in the atmosphere was actually electricity. No one had any concept of that before he came along and proved it with the kite and the key.
So his legacy preceded him in Europe.
Yes, he was immediately made a member of the Royal Society, which was the greatest scientific organization in England, and he was made, and this was astonishing because the French don't do this very often, they made him a member of the French Academy of Sciences.
The Académie Française.
Wow.
So he was, when he arrived, now Congress sent him over to France in top secret. He was on a ship that if it had been captured, he would have been hanged. So no one had any idea that he was actually on that ship. And when he set foot on French soil, the French went nuts because they already knew who he was and they loved him. So it was his scientific reputation.
I did not know that.
So are you telling me that if we sent Neil deGrasse Tyson on a secret mission to talk to Vladimir Putin,
Well, no,
that there could be a possibility
Yeah,
that we might be able to get something done?
yeah.
Okay, this is very encouraging. This is beautiful and brilliant, and I'm deeply moved by this fact that science in the day would be elevated to become something even greater than diplomacy itself, because it sailed above popularity contests or anything else, or the seizing of power. It recognized brilliance, and that gives us deep hope, I think.
Yeah, and let me tell you something else that's totally inspiring. You mentioned before about Captain Cook.
Yes?
Well, after that voyage, they sent him back. You remember this?
Yeah, he had multiple voyages, yeah.
And
Until he didn't.
well, that's...
Well, I was in Hawaii once, and I was watching Don Ho, okay? That's how old I am. I was watching Don Ho. And someone asked him at the end, what happened to Captain Cook? And Don Ho said, I don't know. We haven't seen him in a while. So, rumors are that he was eaten by
He
locals.
was.
Yeah, okay.
So here's the thing. During the war, during the American Revolution, Captain Cook Well, actually, they didn't know it in London, but he had already been put in the pot. But the rest of his boats, the rest of his ships.
Somebody had Captain Cook for dinner. Yes.
But the rest of it, but his ships that had.
Sorry, that was low-hanging fruit. I had to say, somebody had Captain Cook for dinner, and they enjoyed it. Yeah. Okay,
We heard it the first time.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Ellen. We'll shut up. Please continue.
Well, so word reached Europe that Captain Cook's ships were on their way back from this voyage of exploration and discovery. And Franklin was our ambassador in France. He couldn't communicate with Congress. There was no way to do that. A letter might take 6 weeks to go and 6 weeks to come back. He had to act on his own. So when he found out that Cook's ships were traveling north, he issued, on his own initiative, an order to every single American captain sailing on the ocean: leave those ships alone. Not only leave them alone, but if you meet with Captain Cook's ships, now keep in mind these are British ships, and by rights, any American would have been authorized to seize them. Franklin said, leave them alone. In fact, give them any assistance that they might require, because they are on a mission, a scientific mission, and science should be in a plane above politics.
Wow.
When word reached the Royal Society in England that Franklin had done this, still in the middle of the war. I mean, the war was like at its height. The Royal Society voted to give him a gold medal. And the British Admiral, the head of the British Admiralty, wrote him a letter and sent it to him. And you can just imagine what this meant to him.
Yeah, I mean, if the world recognizes your work, that goes beyond just whatever satisfaction you'd get recognizing yourself. So, congratulations.
I'm far too humble to.
But wait, it didn't stop there. Europe turned dark in 1783.
Oh, this is interesting, Ellen.
For mysterious reasons.
This is while I'm in France in 1783. This is the same time that we are writing the Treaty of Paris. The war will be coming to an end soon.
So, tell me what happened then.
Well, it was this amazing, terrifying thing that happened in the summer of 1783. Hadn't yet signed the treaty. The sky all over Europe turned dark. The sun was just this dim little disk in the sky. When the sun set, it was blood red. People were terrified. That summer,
And they got all biblical, probably, right?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
That summer was super, super, super hot. There were thunderstorms. People were dying. Livestock was dying. Nobody knew what in God's name was going on. And that continued for months into the next winter, which correspondingly was the coldest winter on record. And so at a certain point, I mean, scientists all over Europe were writing to each other, trying to figure out what caused this, what's going on here. And Franklin, very tentatively, wrote a letter, a little essay, which he called Meteorological Conjectures, because he wasn't sure, but he analyzed the situation and he said—
the sign of a good scientist is if you don't really know for sure, you don't say that you know for sure.
And the really good ones never say they're sure.
Certainly.
Because then they can never be wrong.
All right.
So what he said was he thought that it was possible that the particulate in the air was actually ash and gases from a volcano in Iceland, that he had read a story telling him that this huge explosion had happened, eruption. And it turned out he was absolutely right.
And that happened just a few years ago, even.
10 years ago,
Yeah, around there. Yeah, a volcano in
the
Iceland erupted.
same volcano.
The same. They had to stop all air traffic.
Yes.
The airplanes. We invented how to fly. Just so you know. Okay.
Montgolfier, I've seen men air balloons.
So because jet engines take in air, and if the air is filled with dust from a volcano, that is bad.
Yeah.
But if you look at prevailing wind patterns in the rotating Earth, generally they move west to east. That happens in the United States. It happens over Europe. And
I wonder how we determined that that was happening in the United States.
Remember
Sorry.
how he said he's so humble?
I'm sorry. I proved that weather appearing to come to Philadelphia from the northeast was in fact coming from the southwest, hence the nor'easter term that I... Sorry, please continue.
So I wouldn't even call that a good guess. I mean, he had to really think through what that is and what
Yeah.
it meant and arrive at that conclusion.
Yeah.
Man. Ben, what could you tell me about Mesmer?
Friedrich Mesmer.
Yes.
So Mesmer had been going...
Anton,
thank you. Anton Mesmer.
Friedrich
thank you.
was pretty good too, though.
Friedrich, Anton Mesmer, Anton Friedrich, Friedrich von Steuben. So Anton Mesmer is going around Europe, the continent, claiming a new form of medical treatment, which will eventually become known as animal magnetism, this quality that rests within us. And he can treat it. And he has various techniques, and eventually this animal magnetism can be affected, he claims, by a musical instrument that I had invented known as the glass harmonica. And eventually, he finds his way to France while I'm there as our minister to France. And I will let Ellen take over from this point and let you know what happens when Mesmer, Antoine Mesmer, and his animal magnetism begins to practice.
This is the
in
same
Paris.
Mesmer as what gave us the to mesmerize.
Yeah.
So this
Okay.
mesmerizing.
That's
is
the same
part-
Mesmer. Okay.
This is part
You know
of
you
this
can't
same,
resist me.
This is the same. The music is very.
well, the music is incidental, in fact.
Please.
I mean, he used music, but then he didn't use music. Here's the thing about Mesmer. The reason he came to France is because he was kicked out of Vienna. This is a guy, this was a doctor who gathered people around, turned off the lights, put his patients right in front of them, stroked their thighs. I'm not kidding
women.
you. And then he would look deep into their eyes, mesmerism, and then he would tell them that whatever was ailing them, he could cure.
Sounds like a human resources problem.
And people believed him, and folks flocked to his clinic.
They believed it because they wanted it to be true.
Well, nobody understood that until
He claimed he could cure blindness.
claimed he could cure all kinds of things. And so he gets run out of Vienna. He comes to Paris, sets up clinics. All these French people come, pay tons of money. They're all having symptoms and twitching and God knows what. And the government's getting really worried about this guy. So the King of France appoints a commission of the greatest scientists from the Academy of Sciences and the greatest doctors from the Academy of Medicine. And they say, you gotta investigate this guy. Now what's this is one of the most important incidents in the history of medicine of the 18th century, because, just think about it, nobody could see this magnetic fluid. And they put Benjamin Franklin on the commission. You can understand why. He was the guy who had identified this invisible force in the sky. Now there's a doctor claiming there's some invisible force that he can manipulate. And only he knows the secret, he's not telling. So how do you get at this? How do you figure out whether it's true or not? And one of the most brilliant things about this commission was they conferred, they tried to think, how do we devise experiments to get at this? And they came up with this idea. Animal magnetism can exist without being useful, but it cannot be useful if it doesn't exist. So the science contingent said, before we do anything else, we have to see if we can prove whether this invisible force exists. And they did, over the course of 4 months, a series of controlled experiments that are mind-blowing. And they wrote up a big report that reads like a detective novel. It's so well written, and you're just on the edge of your chair. The one experiment that was the one that clinched it, that animal magnetism didn't exist, they had a doctor who practiced magnetism, and he went and he magnetized a tree.
Apricot tree. Yes, in my garden.
In Franklin's yard. And they said to the guy, now you can bring with you a patient, you choose the patient, and we're going to test, you can blindfold him and see if he can feel anything from the magnetized tree. Now, this was a little boy, 12 years old, and I don't think they were counting on the fact that the kid would be blindfolded, and that when the doctor magnetized the tree, the kid was inside the house. So there could be no communication. Well, the kid, with his blindfold, went to the wrong tree and started shaking and having convulsions and God knows what. Anyway, it was obvious that this was a bunch of hooey.
The word is bullshit.
Right.
Yes, sorry, excuse me for the thing.
But here's the next part of the story that is mind-blowing. After they proved that it didn't exist, it was Franklin who had for almost all of his life been thinking about how the mind can affect sensations in the body.
This is the key.
And so they devised a series of amazing tests that we would call double-blind experiments, where they had patients think that they were being magnetized when they weren't. They had patients sitting there not knowing anything was going on with the doctor, shooting death rays at them. They did all kinds of variations, and the conclusion was, this thing worked if the patient believed that it would work. And this was the moment in the history of science when what they called imagination. They said, animal magnetism doesn't exist, but it seems to be true that our own minds are able to cause all kinds of physical sensations in our body. And this led to what we call the placebo effect, all kinds of things like that.
That's fine. I like that term.
Well, they did the wrong experiments. If they wanted to know if animal magnetism really existed, all they had to do was put Chuck Nice in a cocktail party.
That's how that works.
But this is a very important notion, because I have tried in everything I have endeavored to serve the benefit of mankind, and here we have an unscrupulous doctor practicing what is clearly an unscrupulous technique.
But you wouldn't have known that until you could demonstrate it and have
That's
everyone
it.
else convinced of it.
But what if it serves some purpose? What if it is useful for some? What if they believe themselves to be healed?
I don't mind that, but just don't call it science. Call it something else. So I'm going to summarize, if I may, that the life of Ben Franklin was not so much enumerated experiments. His entire life was an experiment. And I'm reminded with the starkness of the detail here, just in blunt detail, that an experiment is the boundary between what is known and unknown in the universe. What is unknown and unknown for you. So, experiments are something to be cherished, something to be cultivated, something that we should continue our entire lives, lest we ossify in whatever was the last course we took in school, and then you think that's the understanding of reality. But reality is continually being explored by the likes of Benjamin Franklin in modern times, and we hope continuing into the future.
Yeah.
And the more people who think that way and participate in that exercise will transform civilization as we know it, because we need it, because we need to become better shepherds of our own future that right now is driving off a cliff.
Yeah.
So, thank you all for coming. This has been StarTalk Live at the Keswick Theater. Thank you, Ellen Cohn. And Chuck Nice.
Excellent.
Mitchell Kramer as Benjamin Franklin, ladies and gentlemen.
Very kind.
All of you drive safely, stay safe. As always, keep looking up.
Hi, Gary.
Hey, Neil.
All right. And I got Chuck. Chuck, baby, how you doing, man?
Hey, what's up, Neil?
And today we're going to talk about baseball data analytics. Ooh. Now, we all think we know something about baseball. And we don't all. Well, because there's so much time the announcers fill between pitches. That is the 37th pitch he's thrown in the second inning. The first time it's like, where does all this data come from? And why are they talking about it? And does it have any meaning? And where's it going? And does it make the team win? There are people who specialize in that. And one such person is our guest, who spent the summer of 2022 interning with the New York Yankees data group. And his name is Ben Morrow. Ben, welcome to StarTalk.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So the Quantitative Analysis Associate, that's a cool title, especially for the New York Yankees, which is my home team, being native of the Bronx. And you're a PhD student in a joint program in finance and economics at University of Chicago in their Booth School of Business. So Ben, what is a Quantitative Analysis Associate? And we all want to know, if you did that for the Yankees, did you have a free parking space?
Exactly.
Well, thanks again for having me on here. So every baseball team now basically has an in-house analytics department. In fact, most of all major league sports now have an in-house analytics department, and that's because at the end of the day, what these teams are trying to do is win. And
really, that's what they try to do. They try
Surprise!
Some teams are trying to make money for their owners, but a lot of it has to do with winning. And you're trying to manufacture edge wherever you can for the fans. That's going to, from facing towards the fans. Most of what you see is what the players do on the pitch, but anything that you can do to sort of improve strategy informed by data. There's going to be a team in the back office that's trying to figure out what to do. Again, every team has this. I think in baseball, it's much more advanced than in other sports, and I can sort of talk more about why I think that's the case. But that's effectively what I was doing. Now, there are parking spaces. Obviously, I was taking the D train, but it's easy enough to get there.
So, Ben, I have to ask you, we are 20 years or so on from Bill James and Moneyball, right? And Billy Beane and all the rest of it. So he totally changed the game in terms of analytics. Where are we now as opposed to where he was then?
Yeah, so obviously what Bill James did for the game was incredible. And I think he really got the whole statistics revolution going, shed light on a bunch of
would you say
metrics.
he's the father of sabermetrics?
For sure, he's the father of sabermetrics. Doesn't mean that there wasn't anything going on before that. And even the statistics he was calling from sort of box scores in games, we had much more data available for that than for other sports. But he certainly revolutionized the game and sort of brought forth a whole new set of statistics. And his historical abstract, which is a big magnum opus about this, certainly set the stage. Now, since then, there's been a lot of changes. So,
which is what historical abstracts is a book that he published.
A book that he published.
He published dozens of books, didn't he?
He published dozens of books, but that sort of is his big one that sort of goes through everything. It's a long read. I'm not sure I would recommend it unless you're really into it, but it is sort of like the most famous one.
I'm sure he appreciates your endorsement there, Ben.
Yeah.
Whatever you do, people, don't read this.
So Ben, what was being overvalued previous to the sort of sabermetrics, and what was being undervalued?
That's a good question, because obviously people wanted that shifted. Everything shifted, so that's fascinating.
Sure. So certainly, what was being undervalued was sort of how people get on base. Right?
On base.
So if you think on base, gets on base. If you think back to the movie. So, things like getting walked, which is sort of for those that don't know, it's when the pitcher throws 4, pitches outside the zone until you automatically take first base. That's sort of, a somewhat unsexy event that happens because you sort of, walk to first base. That's why it's called a walk. And, you're not hitting it. It's not clear the extent to which it's a demonstration of skill. But that's basically as valuable, at the end of the day, as getting a hit.
Wait, in Little League, they told us walk is as good as a hit. So why is that really a revelation? I mean,
it was somewhat of a revelation in the sense that I think people didn't recognize it as much as a skill beforehand. So some people are better at getting on base. And so
also too, little leaguers aren't getting paid.
So, how do you know that, Chuck? How do you know that?
When I'm paying you millions of dollars, I am not paying you to walk to first base. But you're right. It's on base. It doesn't make a difference how you get there. It is a skill.
So the shift would have been that some people walk more than others, and so it's not just a failure of the pitcher to get you out. It's a skill of the batter to foul off good pitches and watch and collect the balls so that so maybe that's the skill set that was unappreciated.
Oh, absolutely.
Not just simply that a walk is the same as a hit. Right.
Battling the pitcher. So you see guys that do this where, they might have a 2-2 count, right? And they're just forcing the pitcher to keep throwing because they're getting just a little bit of that ball. They're fouling off, and now it's a full count. You know
you're
what
blowing
I mean?
my good pitch. Those are my best pitches you're messing with there.
Exactly. Yeah. You're raising the pitch count, and listen, you're increasing your chances of getting a hit or getting walked.
It's also not an invariant skill, but you can also manufacture it, I think, was another thing you figured. So, if you just tell people don't swing at the first pitch, walks are going to go up. So it's not just something that you're born with or,
Right.
Right. So that's an acquired knowledge through experience, and then whether you get it through your own personal experience or someone whispers that in your ear. But baseball, as everybody knows, apart from you, Ben, isn't really my sport. British accent, no baseball. But I did come across something called Pythagorean winning percentage and power speed number, which kind of left me scratching my head to a certain extent, but I guess you could explain it if you could.
No, Pythagoras was the first person to actually give us baseball data?
Yes, he was. Pythagoras was little known. He batted cleanup. He knew the angles on the game.
You see him on that vase, don't you?
Yeah. On the Grecian urn has a baseball player on it.
Well, what is that, Ben? What is that?
Yeah, so the Pythagorean wind percentage is basically the idea that sort of wind can be, somewhat random in the sense that you can, just win by 1 run or just lose by 1 run. And that's going to show up just as much in your winning record as, winning by 10 runs or winning by 20 runs, right? But obviously, we'd like to sort of say the team that wins by, 10 runs is, a better team than the team that just scrapes by with 1 run. So basically, because of that, your winning percentage might be a little random, right? And so the Pythagorean sort of win formula was one thing that Bill James developed, where he said, rather than sort of look at wins directly, let's see how well we can predict wins just based on the runs you've scored and the runs that have been scored against you, right? And obviously, your winning percentage should be increasing in the runs you've scored and decreasing in the runs scored against you. And he came up with this very nice little formula that's just sort of the runs you've scored squared over the runs you've scored squared plus the runs you've allowed squared. And that tends to predict wins to a much better degree than just sort of your winning percentage overall. So it's a way to say, if we can just use runs scored and runs allowed, how well can we predict your winning percentage based on that? And it tends to be much less random.
As opposed to just we won, as opposed to we won a game. This is, taking how many runs scored to predict you win a game.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the point is, just if I understand correctly, if you just barely win a game by a run or just barely lose a game by a run, that has enough statistical fluctuation that it's not really measuring anything as much as other games where you're more dominant.
That's exactly right. And I think the other reason why it's valuable is a lot of times when we're thinking about other things in baseball, like hits or assigning sort of values, we're not assigning values in terms of the probability of a win, right? Someone, bats, 100 points higher. We're not saying this guy raised the probability of wins by X percent. We're saying this person scores X more runs, right? And so if we want to translate that into actual metrics like wins, we need something like this theorem that sort of has higher predictability.
Interesting.
So Ben, we started out by you saying that walks were undervalued. What about home runs over the decades?
Ooh.
We all love home runs. Oh, and by the way, the walk-off home run where you win by one run is all exciting, but it's interesting because that gets the blood pumping. But had they won by 5 runs and they're already ahead going into the 9th inning, that's less exciting, but more valuable to you as a predictor of wins. So, but just let me ask, what role do or should home runs play in any of this?
Yeah, so home runs are sort of very valuable. I think that they're sort of one of the easiest ones to quantify because you just, you immediately have the run value. You're not trying to predict out of sample anything, right? You immediately get the runs plus whoever's on base. So I think, and obviously we now have sort of more home run hitters, right? So I think the game's moving to a spot where we have people who sort of hit home runs and don't hit home runs, and we don't have as many sort of hitch rows anymore who are more consistent hitters. Yeah, I think I'm not sure I'm not sure how the sort of the imputed run value of those have changed over time. I think they're the easiest to get right, probably, because they're right there.
Because we all remember that when Babe Ruth first hit 50 home runs, that was more than any other entire team hit. So clearly home runs was not a thing at some time early in the history of the game. And now everyone's waiting for a home run, right?
Well, and let's not forget, he did it while with a bourbon and a cigar in each hand.
Yeah, and beer and hot dogs too.
Exactly.
Yeah. that was his steroids.
Well, whatever works. So, okay, here in 2022, outside of you hit more home runs, you win a game as a stat, what is considered by the quantitative analysis guys the holy grail for a player? What is the thing that you got that, then you're going to the Hall of Fame?
Oh, good one.
Sure. So obviously I can't talk to what, anything proprietary about what people
Sure.
call, but I will say that sort of more generally, if you sort of just sort of look at what MVP winners have sort of led the league in, sort of the main stat that people use is now this measure called OPS, which is on base plus slugging. So that's sort of a great measure. So what that does, it literally takes your on base percentage. So what percent of plate appearances do you get on base by any means? And it adds to that a slugging rating. And a slugging rating is sort of like a batting average. So, what percent of at bats do you get a hit? But it rescales it for how many bases you get on that at bat. So a home run is going to be 4 times as valuable as a single. A double is going to be twice as valuable as a single. And so when you add on base percentage plus slugging, you're sort of combining this consistency metric, which is sort of how often are you getting on base, which is sort of how valuable people are you conditional on getting on base? So, for example, Aaron Judge this year led the MLB in OPS. He will probably be the MVP if I had to guess, and that sort of tends to be the main metric. And everything is sort of a very.
Ben, I got to get this off my chest. Mathematically, it is completely meaningless to add two percentages that come from different origins. It's completely mathematically meaningless. And every time I see an OPS, I cringe, just as a math fluent person. I just have to.
You
put
shout
it
at the
there.
TV, Neil. Do you shout at the TV?
It's like saying, what percentage you get on the exam? Well, I got 90% on the exam. Or how much water's left in the glass? 50%. So let's add the two and believe that means something. I just can't.
Well, it would mean something if you were thirsty while you were taking the test.
Thank you, Chuck, for explaining that to me. Okay, so that's the new darling number then. Okay.
Yeah,
right.
And what you said actually is exactly correct. I've actually read some studies where they say, should we multiply them instead of add them? And they come up with a multiply and say, how would the rankings change? So there is no good reason sort of ex ante to add them, but it actually does have surprising sort of predictive power. So it does sort of work, even though it probably shouldn't.
Right. So, and if you hit a home run every time at bat, you're batting 4,000.
You're slugging 4,000.
It's 4,000.
Yeah. Wow. Look at that.
Yeah.
So what's the sneakiest stat that means something that most people would not think it should mean anything? But
I got one. How close you lean in so you get hit by the pitch. You take one for the team.
Oh, that's pretty.
No, some batters get hit more than others. And
Absolutely.
It's not just a random stray ball. They're leaning into that stuff.
But
They're not liked.
Honestly, what you just said I wouldn't be surprised if that had some significance.
Yeah, but I'd like my flesh and skin tissue intact. Okay, I don't want.
like my face. I like my face.
So we now have new technology thanks to StatCast that lets us see the exit velocity of a hit, so how hard the ball is hit. And this has now sort of been adopted both in the mainstream, so you see sort of New York Times articles about it. They mention it sort of in the streams of baseball games, and people sort of really like this statistic now that we just didn't have the ability to measure a long time ago. Mm-hmm. And it tends to have sort of a lot of cool predictive power. It's sort of very easily digestible, and how hard you hit the ball now is sort of a really important statistic.
All right, wait a minute. Now I got a question for Neil for physics. So Neil, take what he just said.
Yeah.
Does always hitting the ball hard means that it's going to leave the park?
No, the angle matters. They still do, from what I've seen, Ben, of course, they'll give you, quote, exit velocity, except the ball doesn't exit the field, all right? And it's, so there's some hard hit balls that go in the gap that are 100 miles an hour. They just didn't have the angle to then reach the stands. But what intrigues me is you have all these data from StatCast. Is there a new thing people now care about, or is it just? Are you flooded? And can you have what's the term? Analysis paralysis. Where
paralysis by analysis,
yeah. You have too much data where you think you have insights, but in fact you don't. You just have numbers.
It's like being in the cereal aisle at the supermarket.
Okay.
We do have a huge amount of data. We have more, now than we did many years ago. Not just sort of we have more things now on everything about every pitch and every hit, but also going down to leagues that we never even collected data on, sort of vertically. So I think there are certainly times where we do not know what to do with that data, in the sense that, there are questions we haven't explored, or if you suddenly get a new a data set on, for example, how hard every ball was hit, what's the first thing you do? I don't think that we're at the point where we're sort of coming up with false insights based on data, because I tend to think that people are very careful with sort of understanding out of sample predictability and stuff like that. But there's still more data coming in that was sort of we didn't have previously, either at new leagues or at existing.
You know where I think they're getting something wrong is
where?
in the bat speed and exit velocity, and there's this like sweet spot where the angle that it comes off the bat that they've been talking about, where you're more likely to get a really good hit or a home run. What they're not considering is the angle that the swing makes to the ground. So in other words, the angle that is more likely to give you a home run is around 30 degrees plus or minus. However, physics tells you the best angle to send something the farthest is 45 degrees. So why the difference? The difference is if you swung at a 45 degree angle, then the motion of the bat is in the same direction as the motion of the ball, and you'll be able to hit the ball 500 feet. But what's happening is you're swinging horizontally, and the ball is coming up at an angle from it, so that the bat is not entirely moving in the direction the ball exited the bat. And that angle difference is not showing up in anybody's StatCast that I have seen. I just got to put it out there.
Wow.
I actually always wondered that myself. I'm glad to know that. I wondered why it wasn't 45 degrees.
And it's because if you're swinging horizontally, every angle that's not horizontal to the bat has less speed coming off the bat than the bat does swinging. Okay, so in the limit, you swing and then the ball goes straight up. Well, you swang really hard. The quote exit velocity is really fast, but it's not in the direction you need it, and the ball just goes straight up. So all of this matters, and I don't see anybody. So they have the numbers, but they don't have all the physics that would matter. Here's something else. I'm getting this all off my chest. So the speed of the pitch, Ben. Where do they measure the speed of the pitch?
At release.
At release. Okay. Well, all data shows that there's up to an 8 mile an hour slowdown of the pitch by the time it crosses the plate. So the pitcher throws a 95 mile an hour fastball. It crosses my plate at 87 miles an hour. But the announcers keep saying, boy, he blew that 95 mile an hour fastball right by him. But at the time it went past him, it was 88 miles an hour. Or it'll go from 88 to 80 or 100 to 92. No one's talking about this.
Neil is the baseball cop sitting behind the billboard.
Yeah, he certainly is. We're back to that one again.
The billboard.
I clocked you at 95. I'm pretty sure I was only doing 87. Officer, I'm pretty sure.
You know someone's going to use that as an argument now. You know someone is for real going to use that as an argument. Okay, Ben, I must ask you, a bit like Neil, I just put it off my chest. You're in one branch of analytics because we've done shows where it's biodata, it's tech, it's wearables. So what technology, maybe don't give away the IP on the Yankees, but is it wearable tech? Is it the super high-speed cameras for technique analysis? Or are we really opening up with AI?
I got one for you. You can guarantee it's not oxygen uptake of the players, okay? Because they spend most of the time just standing there.
Yeah.
We're not worried about lactic acid buildup in their muscles, okay?
That ain't happening.
No, there is new technology. I mean, they just, a lot of teams now use pitch-com, so you no longer have catchers signaling to the pitcher what to use. They now have microphones, and they pre-program what to say, and it goes into the hat of the pitcher. That's a new technology. But, so
they're literally hearing voices in their head.
Yeah, well,
they're literally hearing voices.
They took a page out of football's book because that used to, they used to signal plays in, and some quarterbacks calls it, and then they just said put a radio in the helmet.
And I'm told this was inspired by the Astros sign stealing problems a couple of years ago. Now it removes that entirely.
Is it? Oh yeah.
Yeah. That's what I read that.
Oh, that's actually kind of cool.
Right, you can't steal the signs, and especially when you're on second base when you're looking right down the pipe.
Right.
Yeah, it's not a thing.
Right.
So Ben, continue. We keep interrupting you because we're just so excited about it.
So yeah, that's true. I mean, you can steal signs based on sort of where the catcher's setting up, even after they've signaled and stuff like that. But sort of stealing the actual signs that the catcher made used to be sort of part of the game that's probably quickly disappearing. But I mean, they're always developing new technology, new camera angles. I don't think sort of in the offices themselves. I still think the bread and butter is going to be, plain old data analysis using statistical techniques, and that's always going to be there.
Where do you think baseball will look for its new data points in the future? Oh, I mean, are we at that point, like Neil was saying, we're kind of maxed out here, or is there still a lot more to go?
I think I think the low-hanging fruits keep disappearing, and so I think that the contributions of analytics are going to come more and more marginal, likely, and that's going to be true in every sport. But I do think we're sort of constantly getting new data, and particularly on sort of pitches and hitting. For example, we didn't even have these sort of exit velocities for pitches or hits, accurately 7 years ago. And so I think there's still a lot more to go with that, probably in any new.
And let me just get your quick opinion. This is the last year of the shift, beginning 2023. Two infielders have to be to the left side of second base and two on the right side, and they can't be so far back that they're on the grass. And so with this shift, I think it'll allow more hits. But could it be that the sabermetrics, that the data, the quantitative analysis was robbing good batters of hits, and the fans? It's not interesting to fans. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. So batting averages have dropped over the past decade pretty precipitously, and shifts have gone up from effectively 8% I think in 2010 to about 35% last year. And I think a lot of people say one caused the other, and so I think that's sort of what MLB had in mind when they banned the shift. And from a data,
I'm going to say a Chuckism right now. I'm going to say they're paid millions of dollars. Hit the ball in the other freaking direction,
someplace else.
Hit it someplace else.
Yeah, when everybody says, "All right, guys, to the left, let's everybody over to the left," you should be like, "All right, I'm just going to hit it on the right."
Hit it to the right. Okay.
Yeah. How about that?
I think that is so simple as a logic. However, with the talent that these guys have, it got to be harder than you think. Otherwise, they just do it.
Look, if the best players in history are hitting the ball, 35% of the time, and now you want them to aim it, I think it's a little more difficult than it looks. But
I got you. I understand what you're saying. I mean, yeah. Still, let's see. What was the last contract? $380 million, I believe. I mean, I'm sure that was a pitcher's contract, but I mean, yeah. If somebody gave me
Jared Cole is up there. He's 10 years. $35 million a year. He's up around
if somebody paid me,
just turned down $460, I think.
Right. So if somebody's turning down $460 million, if you offered me $460 million, I would find a way to not only place the ball anywhere on the field, I would find a way to catch it with my teeth and shoot it out of my ass to do it.
Chuck, let me tell you, if you could do all of that as your agent, I'm going to get you way more than $460 million.
Shoot it out your ass. Now I can't get that out of my head. I got to that's going to be with me all day, Chuck, on that.
That's locked in now, Neil.
Okay. All right, guys, we got to end it there. So Ben, good luck. Sometimes you need a little bit of that in graduate school. You're in your 4th year, and how long is the program?
6 years.
6 years. Okay. Well, keep at it. And we're delighted to have you on here. Give us some insight into the
and when you own the Yankees, remember the people who
yeah.
Who were behind you. Remember the people that were behind you, man.
Just remember the guys that interrupted you a lot. That's all.
All right, guys. This is Neil deGrasse Tyson, your personal astrophysicist. I'm thanking Ben Morrow for helping us out here, getting a little insight into baseball data analytics. This has been a StarTalk Explainer. As always, keep looking. Dude, okay? So we send you down there. You can surf this like tidal wave for a black hole, near a black hole, but your time slows down, and all the people waiting for you up at the spaceship, you live 15 minutes and they live 20 years. Nobody's waiting for your ass to surf that wave. This is StarTalk Sports Edition. Neil deGrasse Tyson, your personal astrophysicist. I'm your host, and I got my co-host, Chuck Nice. Chuck, baby.
What's up, Neil?
All right, Chuck, an actor, comedian, and but more importantly, my co-host, Gary O'Reilly. Thanks to UK for creating you. You're former soccer pro and game announcer, and we got you as my other co-host for this. So thanks for coming in and making this happen. Now you put together this show, so tell me what you and a crack team of producers. So what do you got for us today?
Yes. All right, we have a guest born in Hawaii.
Right.
Little hint of a clue there. Given the name Kai, which I do believe in Hawaiian language is the sea. Rode his first wave aged 4. 20-something years later, he's a red ball athlete, 8-time stand-up paddle world champion, if I'm not mistaken, the youngest ever Surfer Hall of Fame inductee.
Wow.
In 2019. In 2020, Chuck, you'll love this. He won the Toe-In Surfing Challenge at Nazaré, Portugal.
Wow.
You know that place?
Well, it just doesn't get any bigger than that.
Is that right?
What?
Yeah, Neil.
You see what I did there?
Whoa.
Yeah, I mean, these are liquid avalanches. These aren't waves. These are monsters of the deep. He's a windsurfer, paddleboarder, we know. Windsurfer, kite surfer, wing foiler. He is considered by those that know the ultimate waterman.
Anything on the water, the man does it. Okay? They
And he
call
does it
him
well.
in the surfing world Little Jesus because he walks on water.
Wait, with 70-foot liquid avalanches, and our guest is still alive? Really?
Yeah,
Is that
he's
true?
he's
Okay.
that good. And just to add another facet to this rather incredible diamond, he's also an environmental campaigner who does
Yay.
not mind
Kudos.
beach cleanup himself.
That's because he don't want to surf into a mat of plastic. All right.
I know, but he gets down there and he cleans up himself. So he's proper.
It's fantastic.
So having said all of that, Kai Lenny, all yours, Neil.
Welcome.
Kai,
Yeah.
thank you, dude, for coming on to StarTalk.
Oh, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys. And, I got so many questions for you guys.
No, that's a different show. If you're going to ask me questions, we got questions for you. And not every day
Right on.
we don't get somebody like you on the show. So what is this? I hear that the ocean is like a battery pack for you. What does that mean?
I think just the ocean for me is like kind of what keeps me going. It definitely, I think beyond having, my family and my kids, it's kind of my purpose. I wake up every morning and I just have this drive and longing to get in the water and experiment and, ultimately ride the biggest waves I can find. But
So it calls to you. The ocean calls to you.
Look at that.
it's a calling for sure. One of my favorite big waves in the world is 15 minutes down the road here on Maui, and it's called the world knows it by the name Jaws, but in Hawaiian it's called Pe'ahi, which means the beacon or to be called, because it calls people from all around the world. And it called me since I was a little kid. I think one of my earliest memories alive was being on the cliff watching my heroes surf this gigantic wave. So what better place to have been born to become a product of my environment I am today than having Mount Everest sort of in your backyard.
Speaking of little kids, what's a safe age for big wave? I mean, you're a big wave surfer. I mean, how's that? Of course, you got to graduate to that, but I'm saying, how young would it be, or could you be, and somebody say, get on out there, kid, go ahead and get your first big wave?
Well, I always thought, surfing is kind of like this activity, or water sports in general are these activities that are kind of outside of society's bubble. I feel like the rules change, you could have, all the money in the world, all the opportunity in the world. But at the same time, there's a different pecking order out in the water. There's like a different kind of it's very tribal, I would say. And I mean that in the most positive way. You kind of go back on our ancestral tendencies. And when I first surfed Jaws was with Laird Hamilton and Dave Kalama when I was 16 years old. And back then I thought that was young. I was probably the second youngest person to ever go out to surf these proper big waves. Because there's sort of a line in the sand where you could surf a giant wave, maybe on the outer reefs here, that could be a 30-foot face. But as soon as you go to a place like Jaws or Pe'ahi, all of a sudden it's a completely different energy level. I would say there's 5 or 6 big waves I know around the world that have sort of this next level energy. that it's, I don't know how you could measure it, but you can feel it in the air. You know how energy can't be created or destroyed. It starts with the sun, it goes to the atmosphere, the wind, and it goes into the ocean. And then when these waves explode, this energy gets released, and you don't know what it transforms into necessarily, but it almost feels like it goes into your cell. But nowadays, kids are starting to surf these giant waves at like 12, 13 years old. And I'm like thinking to myself, are they even strong enough? Can their limbs handle getting pulled out? And it's actually been quite remarkable and eye-opening how big of waves they can not only ride because they got the skill set, but how they can survive, and they come up smiling. And I'm like, maybe this generation's just built completely different. But
wait. So you're ready to sit on the porch and say, these young whippersnappers coming up.
Yeah, at 30
I
years,
remember in my day.
at 30 years old, that's what I'm thinking. I'm like, oh my gosh, these guys are next level. I mean, guys and girls, you should see these little kids that are, they're going to be leading the sport into the future, big wave riding. And it's really exciting. I think part of, being a big wave rider of any kind is it's kind of like you can come in really hot for a couple of years, and you could be amazing. But to be able to sustain, the long career through big waves is really difficult, just because, it's life and death. Sometimes it's, it doesn't happen every single day. So you don't have the opportunity to necessarily practice. You kind of get flung in from a flat summer into an apocalyptic winter. And, while the rest of the world's, kind of bummed that it's going to be like an El Nino winter, all the big wave surfers are rejoicing because that means bigger waves and more consistent big waves.
Wow. So you said you're 15 minutes from a big wave location. So that means if we were to imprison you, we would just put you in Colorado or something, a landlocked state, and you would die. My life cycle would be much shorter, but I'd probably find a mountain to tomahawk down,
Right.
Oh, okay. All right.
You just start snowboarding, right?
Yeah.
And I thought, my biggest inspiration for big waves was snowboarding, because it got to the point where, you can ride a big wave and you can go straight, you can ride inside these giant barrels. But I wanted to, what's the next level? And that's doing big aerials on big waves. And if someone like Travis Rice, one of the legends of snowboarding, can go to Alaska and do, an 80-foot jump and do 2 rotations, why can't I do it on a big wave? And I actually ended up going to Alaska a couple of weeks ago, and actually experiencing with him what it's like. And I'd have to say, being in the mountains to me is far scarier than actually riding big waves. Big waves, like, it's only a 50 to 60, 80, 70-foot wave on the face. Or these mountains are 2,000 vertical feet, and you have crevasses, 500-foot cliffs, avalanches coming behind you that'll bury you. You can't swim.
What makes a good movie scene where the avalanche is behind you, and can you ski faster than the avalanche?
I experienced that.
So we're in a position to throw some physics at what it is you do. Do you think much about the physics of your rotations and your speed and the waves themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. I was never really good in math at school. I think I had so much energy, sitting down wasn't kind of my calling, and looking at numbers. But when I really got into what I'm doing now today, it's funny how the passion can bring out things that I wasn't necessarily good at, like the physics of things, trying to understand all the rotations. And then even like trying to predict these big waves, you end up sort of becoming a meteorologist, trying to read weather patterns and understand all these sort of things, and, the tides of the world and so on and so forth. But I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on all of this.
I'll just set up the stage here, and then I know Gary and Chuck have questions. So in case the public doesn't know, a wave moving through the water is the speed of energy that has been deposited in the water at some earlier point. So water is actually not moving at that speed. It is the energy of all the water molecules communicating the flow of that energy from one molecule to the next. So that's why, like, you ever see a duck sitting up on in the ocean, and then a wave just comes under the duck. The duck just goes up and down. That energy went under the duck and kept going, but the water didn't transfer until you get to the shoreline, where the energy has to go somewhere. Where's it going to go? And if it's a really deep ocean, a tiny little wave in the deep ocean, measure up how much that energy is. And as the shoreline gets shallower and shallower, that energy is still there, but it's not moving as much water. So it has to move the water higher. And you get bigger and bigger waves as the shoreline gets shallower and shallower. And now that it's 100% of everything I know about what you do. So,
wow.
Well,
But Neil, is that why when you have a shelf off the shoreline, the waves get that much bigger at that place? Because
Correct.
at once all that energy is now slammed up to the shelf, but now it boom has to go somewhere, so it goes up and over.
Correct. It goes up because it was carrying that much more mass of water previously, and now if the water is if the shore is shallower, then the mass of water isn't available to it, so it's got to do something. The energy has to go somewhere,
Gotcha.
And so it raises it higher against gravity. That's what it's doing. It has the power to do that.
So, Kat, when you get towed up, you're on one of these big waves. Do you know in advance what trick you're about to perform, or do you have to make intuitive, on the spot calculations that go, you know what, this wave, this angle, this wind, I need to bring this trick? Or is there some of you pre-planned how you're going to do this? Because you've got to give me artistry.
Will
and
the wave
stay alive.
influence your decision?
Yeah.
So another way to say it is, is your performance bespoke to each wave?
You know, there's no two waves ever alike, even at a perfect spot. And a lot of these places, the tricks or kind of the approach that I have really depends on the spot I'm traveling to. You know, for example, here in Hawaii, because we have no continental shelf and it just rises, the mountain rises from super deep water. I'll kind of find the right equipment to ride. So like, let's say if I'm getting towed into a wave, my board will be 13 pounds here. And I will be, you know, probably traveling at around, the wave itself will be going 25 to 30 miles an hour, depending on the amount of joules that the storm produced. So on the biggest days, we'll get 27,000, 30,000 joules. And then the wave will be like, a big day out there is 20 feet at 20 seconds, which is kind of the swell interval and the sea height that it travels from 4,000 miles from the storm. And, you know, I guess really with having all that knowledge and knowing that there's like a 25 knot trade wind, there's going to be a chalk going across the face. I'll know that the trick I want to do at the beginning, if I have the opportunity, is a backside 360, and I'll be going left instead of right. And when I land, my board it'll be more of a 540 than a 360. So I'll be kind of landing on right again. And that'll put me in the perfect position to drop in and hopefully pull into the barrel of these giant waves. The tricky part about big waves, or just waves in general, is you can have a plan, but if you stick too much to it, you're going to kind of like, it's like dancing with a partner. If you're kind of trying to do your own thing and you're not kind of adjusting to that person, it's going to look forced. It's going to not look right. It's not going to be fluid. So in the back of your head, I always have an arsenal of maneuvers or things I can do. And as it kind of comes without thinking, I just kind of like do, you know, it's like, you don't think about walking, but you know that you have to put the next foot forward every time you step. And it's kind of like that. So I spend a lot of time doing visualization. If I'm doing a long plane ride somewhere, you know, I'm just praying it's not my last plane ride. And I'm also thinking about how I'd want to do it. So having music as a trigger, and trying to kind of place myself there and get my heart pumping to the point where I feel like my palms are sweating on an airplane. I feel like I'm there.
You're factoring so much in there, the wind speed, the knowledge of a storm far out at sea, how much energy is coming towards you. But surely the underwater terrain matters, right? If there's a slope change, that'll have a big effect on the wave, won't it?
Yeah, and that's like, it's a great point. Every wave that I travel to, I have a really good understanding of the spot. So like here at Jaws, Pe'ahi, The bathymetry is really unique.
Ooh, bathymetry, love it.
Oh, new
There's
word.
Look at that.
New word alert.
Yep.
But the bathymetry of like just the contour. So like, for example, we don't have a continental shelf here in Hawaii. It just is deep water, and that's the reason why all of the waves here have so much force, because you can basically guarantee that same energy coming from the storm is going to just unload. And that's why Hawaii is known as being one of the best big wave places on planet Earth, maybe one of the more consistent ones. Here, you know,
just to remind people, the Hawaiian Islands are volcanic cones, so they come up from the bottom of the ocean. So your slope is, you're right, it's not the continental shelf, it's just the mountainside as it enters the water, right? It's that the mountain continues all the way down, and so that's
it's
a
that
steeper
vertical mass.
Yes, there it is. Very
And there's
cool.
and just because we've like the island itself is constantly kind of breaking into the ocean. I mean, the big island of Hawaii, which is, you know, you could fit all the other islands into it. Maui was at one point the similar size, and you can just see daily that the cliff kind of is eroding away just from the salt, and it's almost like the volcanic rock is rusting because we have this red dirt. So there's a lot of ledges along our coastline, and that kind of will take all that swell energy like you described earlier and will force the waves vertically, kind of ledge up. But the interesting thing is you'd think with all this coastline that these giant waves coming in would actually be vertically taller everywhere. But there's a lot of places, there's a lot of, you know, underwater conditions that it requires. Like Jaws has a giant trench that travels way out to sea, and it basically takes all that energy and it kind of sandwiches it in, and it forces it into this kind of like, I would say, track. And the track kind of comes in, and now there's this perfect triangle of reef, not really reef, boulders. We call them dinosaur eggs, because what I believe happened is there was this big point, this big cliff that had eroded away, and what was left was the bedrock. And over time, it turned into these boulders because they kept rolling. And on a big wipeout, when you fall out at Jaws, you can actually hear these dinosaur eggs, probably the size of an entire living room, going clink, clink, clink. And your worst nightmare is your foot gets caught between one of them.
Ouch.
And you hear these big sounds, and the wave itself produces this violent sound, this percussion. But underwater, you could hear rock going. And, you know, you kind of bounce off those rocks sometimes. But luckily, they're pretty round from kind of rolling around. But then there's all this, so these fingers there. And what gives you these long, long hold downs at this particular wave is that, similar to this, if this is shallower and this is deeper, you can get stuck in these fingers and the water's traveling faster above you. So imagine letting go of a balloon inside and it floating and hitting the ceiling. The water's moving so much faster above your head, and you're kind of in this spinning vortex that you try to come up. And we have these inflation vests. So we're wearing these airbags under our wetsuits with CO2 canisters up to 35 milligrams or grams. And when you pull it, it just blows your airbag up and brings you to the surface like a cork. But when the water's moving too fast above your head, you can't penetrate.
You're bouncing off of the faster rushing water.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's like if you try to like dive into a river, you're going to get swept across versus kind of traveling across the river.
Right.
And so the hold downs can vary from, if you're lucky, 5 seconds underwater. And if you're unlucky, you could be under for well over a minute, and you could be dragged maybe 3 football fields.
That's not good.
That's insane. Here's the deal, though. Mentally, all right, the first time this happens to you, then you're, okay, used to 5 seconds, but now you're down for 30 seconds. 35 seconds. What is the training that you have to go through to say, I'm not going to die? Or do you just go, I'm going to die? That's it.
Hey, the first time I fell when I was 16, I was like underwater. I'm like, well, I lived a good life. I'm dead. There's no way. And I opened my eyes and I saw like, it looked like the most violent scene that you could ever paint. It was just these giant lightning clouds moving at a speed that looked like a time lapse. It was just going so quick and such deep blue water, and you just felt like the whole ocean you're trapped under, because in a second, you're 60 feet underwater. So you have to clear your ears immediately. Otherwise, you'll blow your eardrums out. And then it's like you feel the pressure all of a sudden on your lungs. And, you know, there's no training for that. You kind of have to have, this is where like you can do all your homework, you can do everything possible, but you sort of have to have faith in yourself. And I always believed that if you didn't believe in a higher power, put yourself in that situation, you start praying to someone, anyone.
Having described all of that, is that why you went into other events like paddleboarding?
I mean, to be honest, my heroes before me, they did all these things, and I was heavily influenced. And this place on Maui is the mecca of big wave surfing, windsurfing, and a lot of these sports have been invented here. We know that ancient Hawaiians used to paddle on surfboards with canoe paddles, so stand-up paddling, but it was kind of rebirthed here by these legendary figures. And then, you know, a lot of things have been invented that have actually helped us kind of realize the potential of the ocean. Like kite surfing was created here, and most recently, the hydrofoils, it's been finally used now as personal use. And now that's a real sport that has kind of forced everyone to learn physics or the understanding of fluid dynamics. And it's really cool now because like when there's big waves, maybe 5 times a year that are in the exceptional range, let's say 50 to 60, 70 feet high, we have to be able to be entertained somehow, some other way. And what better way of understanding big waves that break along the shoreline than the swells that are out in the middle of the ocean? And so in the summertime, I'll take my hydrofoil board or my paddleboard or whatever, and I'll go ride open ocean swells between the islands.
Kai, with the wing foiling, how much difference is there between the physics that you're presented with as a big wave surfer and then this sort of inter-island foiling that you do?
Oh, so like between the like using the wing and then going like on the swells between islands. Yeah, so that is like, it's funny because as a surfer, your perspective is right where the wave breaks. It's never beyond that. And so, you know, when you're able to like utilize these other kind of equipments or facets of equipment, you basically have the ability to see beyond just where the wave breaks. And with the wind, you know, as a surfer, you've always watched birds ride the ridge line of these swells and get all this energy from the updraft of the wind on these swells. And it's just beautiful. And with the wing, that was kind of always my dream, is to ride along the crest of the wave like I was a bird. I mean, it's constant chase for flight. But the cool thing about like the wing is, you know, you can be jumping and flying like a bird on the way out, and then you could be riding the swells from way out in the ocean in, and then ride the breaking part of the wave and have, you know, because you don't have surface tension of the board dragging across the water, and you're kind of tapping into that energy source like a fish might or a dolphin, you know, below the surface, getting all this lift from the front wing of this hydrofoil. You know, you basically are able to kind of, my perspective on doing sports, or if I have an idea for a sport, is if I had a kind of a spectrum of color and I would look for the gray areas between them. And I'd be like, okay, the premise of this is I'm looking for something high performance in all conditions. And if I can find something super high performance, you know, and eventually I figure out that this one particular area, I'm not doing something high performance, what could I create so that I could be doing something fast, exciting, basically trying to give me the adrenaline fix a big wave might give me. And so, you know, that leads you to what's scarier than testing your skill by basically foiling across between open ocean islands and shark infested, you know, that's the trigger.
Sure enough.
Basically going and surfing these swells, and it's like playing a kind of a game of chess with the ocean, because the swells are popping up. It's all local wind swell. It's not this long ground swell that is perfectly formed for a long time. It's this sort of like game of every 100 yards, maybe less, you know, even 20 yards, a wave is doing this, and you're kind of hopping from one to the next. And if you get in a rhythm with the ocean, It's sort of like being on a swing or pendulum, and it just kind of takes you.
Oh,
So-
interesting.
And so
It's
now,
meditative.
what do you do in the bathtub?
Chuck.
What do I mean, it's like I'm probably using my hand to create a wave and in that barrel.
All right. So speaking of that's barrels and technique. So I just love watching surfing. Like it's so poetic, you know. And I've noticed when you guys do tricks, and maybe I'm noticing wrong. You'll let me know. It looks as though, like a skateboarder, you actually use the wave, like the face of the wave. You kind of surf down it to pick up speed, but then you surf back up it to do the trick. But then somehow you find, because the whole wave is continually curling, it doesn't care that you're there. But then somehow you find like the lip, you do your trick, but then you come right back down in the place where it is once again curling like over you, and what is going on, man? Like that is, I mean, it's really crazy. It's just insane. I mean, am I right when I'm seeing this? Is that what I'm seeing?
Oh, absolutely. You're spot on. It is like skateboarding. The only difference is that ramp is ever changing. And so your decision making of when you're going to hit that lip to catch air or to do a big turn, it all happens maybe a millisecond before you get there. So you kind of initiate your bottom turn. If you go too far into the flats, you're going to lose a lot of speed, but you might want to do that in order to set up for a barrel. But if you're trying to do an aerial, you would cut across mid-face and you'd actually really load your fins up. So there'd be a lot of like pressure. You'd pressure them. So they'd be kind of preloaded. And as you're coming up, without forcing and trying to pull the board with you, you kind of allow the wave to push the board into the bottom of your feet.
So the wave is kind of spitting you out.
Absolutely. The wave is like a dance, you know. The wave is in itself, you have to be, if you're so in tune and timed with the wave, it basically is the one that's kind of helping you along. Damn. Like it's your dance partner. It kind of gives you that ability to, you know, people always wonder, how do you keep your board stuck to the bottom of your feet? And sometimes it's utilizing wind that's going into the wave, and that kind of is like a glue to the bottom of your feet. But most of the time, it's hitting the lip at the right trajectory, at the right speed, because speed is your friend. And the board starts leaving the water, and the lip sort of taps the bottom of it, and it forces it into your feet, and your momentum moving forward kind of grips into it. And as you rotate, it just comes down to where your eyes are drawn to, where you're looking, where your hand position is. So keeping your backhand lower than your right hand, keeping your left hand high, so you kind of pendulum around, or kind of, you know, pirouette rather. So it's like a bunch of little things, and you can definitely drive yourself into insanity trying to figure it out, because you go and try to put this to practice, and unless the wave is a good enough wave or gives you the opportunity, you know, in a single session, you might only get 1 or 2 tries. You know, unless you're at somewhere really perfect, or if you go to the latest man-made waves of the world, which, you know, are in Waco, Texas, in, you know,
didn't we have Kelly Slater on? Doesn't he have one?
He has one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's the dream to be able to go someplace and practice a maneuver repeatedly and not be like waiting for the ocean to spit something out. And also, because that's the thing with surfing, it's not like, okay, it's your turn to go down the ramp. It's literally like surfing's tribal enough where, you know, I'd say 60 to 70% of the time you're battling with other people to be positioned in the right spot to go down the wave. And you might have the best section of the entire day, but there could be somebody paddling out and in your way and drawing your eye, or just being simply in your way to hit it. So you're like, I think that's why surfers can get quite frustrated, because it's this finite resource that doesn't happen all the time, and everyone is like kind of battling over. So to go to a wave pool, it kind of takes.
That's what I always wondered. When I first saw surfing as a city kid, it was featured on ABC's Wide World of Sports.
Yeah,
and they're all the surfers just waiting out there beyond the cresting of the wave, and they're just waiting for a wave to come. And I just thought, suppose you get a crappy wave. Suppose.
Oh, you're so bombed. Yeah. It's sometimes, you know, because there's like usually the best waves of this, like a set of waves that come in most of the time there's 3 waves in a set. At certain spots, there could be up to 10 waves in a set, which is the dream. But 3 waves in a set, first wave usually cleans the line up. So you don't usually go the first wave. And then the second wave is usually the best wave because there's not the water has been taken off the reef or the sandbank. And there's like, it's shallower. So the wave's going to stand vertically better and might barrel. And then there's always the risk that the third one's going to be the biggest wave. But at the same time, it could come in smaller. It's kind of that wild card one where you could, do everything right, get the second wave of the set, be like, I got the sickest wave, and you could kick out, and the third one was the better one. But then it's a risk. It's 50-50. A lot of times you could be like, okay, it's my turn. Everyone knows it. I'm going to let the second wave go. And then the third wave is going to come in. It's going to be the one, and it's flat. It just didn't come in. It was only a 2-wave set. And you're like,
the ocean hates me.
Sure, if you're not in rhythm with the ocean, that is just your worst sessions come when you're not in tune with the ocean. And the best surfers that have won the most championships are the Kelly Slaters of our sport. Essentially, he has the ability, he almost looks like people think from the land that he's willing the ocean, bending the ocean to his will. He's like, he can paddle over here and people are, what is he doing? A wave hasn't broken there all day. And then all of a sudden he'll get the 10-point ride and he'll win the world championship. That has happened to him. He has 11 world titles. It probably has happened to him 7 of those world titles. And that's how he's won.
He is one with the ocean.
He's
in ways that others are not. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Up one with the ocean. And, I think his trick is he's been doing it so long and he's so knowledgeable. He could read, because the ocean always gives you kind of triggers, little signs. Like before a big swell hits, cues. Like the watercolor starts to change here from this kind of aqua blue to this turquoise.
Oh,
and you're like,
really down to fine detail.
Really big details. And then the wind sometimes even shifts when a big swell comes in. It'll here instead of the normal northeast
you
trade
really
wind.
Do have to have all of your senses on high alert, don't you?
Exactly, because it'll turn, like the wind might turn a little more easterly. And it's just because of the disturbance of that storm. And the storm usually gets drawn or it follows the swells pretty far. So it's changing kind of the wind patterns around us. So it's all these little cues. And it's even like we have all, as a surfer, you're always looking for indicator waves. So you look down the coastline and you look for waves that might pop up and give you kind of a hint. Like, oh, okay, a set is coming. Or, a westerly direction, like a swell at 225 is going to come in. Or this set is 235 degrees. You're kind of like, you're taking in little cues. And Kelly's so good at that. He knows the tide. He even knows like the time a swell will hit. And because we have such a vast array of buoys in the Pacific, you can actually time when the biggest wave is going to come in. You could be like, okay, at 1:15, the set of the day is going to come in, because that's when the buoy reading was highest. And that's when there was like the most consistency.
But I thought you guys were just out there twiddling your thumbs waiting for
look at this. I mean, yeah.
All right, some people are so in tune, they don't even know that they're doing this.
Right. They became instinctive. So you know enough based on this conversation, at least, that I've learned that you make your own equipment. Is that because you know more than the people who made the commercial equipment, and so you have to improve upon it? Is that what's going on?
I think I have the ability and the advantage that I'm able to ride conditions that most people can't. And I have the feedback in my head. And I usually try to translate that feedback to the master shapers that I've worked with, or the designers of, my sails, my kites, my wings, and then the hydrofoils and all that. And I've gone to trying to translate a color to somebody who's never seen color before. It's like this, it's always on the tip of your tongue. It's like indescribable. And so, I'm always going to the factory, or like kind of our factory is an old pineapple mill here in the jungle of Maui, with ironically some of the highest technology of the surfing industry, all aerospace, basically stuff that kind of trickles down to, us normal people. We take and we try to like use it to make our equipment better. And so, yeah, like a lot of my best ideas for how I'm going to ride waves and win has come from just epiphanies out in the water where it's like, how did I not see this? It almost took me 15 years of trying to work up the ladder of one particular sport. And then all of a sudden, you see the light and it just comes so clear. And you're like, I have to go in immediately and write this down, or I have to go straight to the people that I work with to try to translate this. And I'd say I have the ability to actually do it all myself, but it's really nice working with people who are so focused on this one sort of skill set to make either the boards, the hydrofoils, or the kites. And it's pretty cool.
Wait, so the boards are water resistant, is that correct?
Well, the boards are foam core. So for the longest time, it's been polyurethane cores. And then it's really transitioned a lot, I would say 50% into EPS core. And now everyone's starting to kind of lean towards kind of environmentally friendly foam that's made out of sea algae, made out of sort of different stuff that if it was to be outside, it's fiberglass or carbon fiber shell, because it really the boards are like basically a crab, soft on the inside and hard on the outside. But then you don't want too stiff of a board, too strong of a board. You want flex in it. So the art form is taking the fibers and basically being able to layer the board in such a way that the board's going to dampen and bend and absorb the sea chop or the water and give you sort of suspension.
So it's more like a reed. The way reeds are designed, they blow with the wind, they bend, they don't break.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're here in Hawaii and you watch a palm tree, a 70, 80-foot palm tree, a coconut tree sway in the wind, they're so strong, but they have give to them and they kind of absorb. So it's like finding that fine line of not too much give to the point where it's going to break, but then, stiff enough that you can have you can translate your body mechanics and energy into that board and then into the water.
Are there any natural water repellent solutions for your equipment as opposed to the high-tech stuff that we hear and see a lot about?
Well, so back in the old days, you would the Hawaiians would cut down the koa tree. They carve the board from within the koa tree, and in order to seal it, they would use some sort of oils. I know nowadays we use a lot of linseed oil to kind of seal wood, and so I don't know the exact oil that they would use, but it's basically they'd rub the oil across the wood and it would just seal it just enough so water would kind of absorb it. It would repel as well. And so that was kind of the natural way of sort of doing that. And that's kind of the core of surfing is first body surfing, and then second would be riding one of these kind of traditional boards because it really connects you directly to it. And there's both sides of the spectrum. There's no better feeling than just riding the kind of one of the, alayas it's called, which is kind of a shorter wood board that's really thin, maybe 1.5 inches thick. But then there's the other side of the spectrum, which is pushing the high performance side of everything. And it's what could we take that, modern science has created and apply it to this, and how far can we go? And so basically every top performing surfer, guess what? They're watching every space shuttle launch because they're so into the stuff that is created to make these rockets go to space and help us survive in space. Everyone's just waiting for anything new that was created to trickle down to us so that we could use it, and maybe it'll be that silver bullet to allow us to ride the waves better or the wind better.
Dude, you could shoot my surfboard into space and it can re-enter without burning up. That's right.
So Kai, we know you are environmentally friendly and you will do your own beach cleanup along with a lot of other people. How do you balance that kind of removal of plastic out of the ocean and with all the high-tech stuff, equipments and sealants that can come on a board or other surfing equipment? How do you kind of keep that out of the equation?
Yeah, it's really ironic, that you want to keep the ocean clean and pristine, and yet we're riding boards that are made of this kind of toxic foam that, won't dissolve in the ocean for 1,000 years. Or just, plastic in general. Everything you get shipped nowadays is full of plastic. It's wrapped in it. It's, and I noticed kind of when we had when the tsunami in 2011 hit Japan, at the time I was still in my teens, and
it's the Fukushima
disaster. That was a real eye opener, because obviously, since growing up on an island, you're really impacted by sort of everything because it doesn't get hidden. It's like you go to the beach and you're going to see trash, or even if there's trash on the street here, there's nowhere to go. You're on an island in the middle of the Pacific. And, the great gyre in the Pacific turned into the great garbage patch. And after that giant tsunami, all that trash or all the stuff that came from Japan got stuck in the gyre. So even today, I'm finding stuff along the beach that is, has Japanese emblems on, Japanese writing. And you're like, this has been out in the ocean that long, and it's not even broken down. The most common color you're going to see at plastic in the ocean is white and blue, because the red, the brighter colors tend to be eaten by fish or chipped away as the sun sort of hits it, and it kind of breaks down enough into small microplastics. Fish will absorb that and eat it. And, I've had a lot of friends who've gotten severe mercury poisoning in places they shouldn't have gotten it. And a lot of people are kind of equating it to the fact that the fish are eating a lot of these plastics, and, generations of these fish are kind of like metabolizing it, and it's turning into sort of a cancerous thing. Basically, when we do these giant beach cleanups, it's like if you had a teaspoon and you're trying to like empty your bathtub while the faucet's on. It's like, it looks good, it feels good. You're doing your part locally. The turtles aren't going to get caught in it and stuff. And, fish hopefully aren't going to keep eating it. But that's like the last place it ends up. And so trying to figure out how to turn off the faucet, it's always like, I feel like when you're trying to preach to somebody, or you're trying to kind of like tell somebody what they can't do and what they should do, it's like people want to rebel from that. Like, I don't want to be like told what I'm doing. I want to have that sort of freedom. And one of the solutions that we've sort of come up with is, at least endemically, but eventually, hopefully mainstream, is without necessarily changing the way people live, changing the products that they're using, and sort of not having them realize that it's changed. So been working with this company, Atlantic Packaging, that's located on the East Coast. It's the single largest family American-owned packaging company. And I mean, they wrap everything in plastic, but they have this initiative right now that we're working on called the New Earth Project. And it's really cool because they're trying to make packaging that is out of sustainable things. So basically cardboards, papers, mushroom fungi, trying to use something like that to make it just as affordable as plastic, so that people will, companies aren't going to lose millions and millions of dollars, billions maybe, on packaging alone to try to ship their products. And it'll give them the incentive, because everyone wants to do the right thing, but shareholders, bottom lines, you kind of got to play the game. And so all the boards that I'm getting now that are shipped around the world are, wrapped in packaging that is sustainable. And literally, if it ended up in the ocean, like a turtle could live off of the mushroom packaging that I had to protect the nose and tail of my board.
Yeah. That's very cool. That is the key. The key is to make it so that you're not asking people to change their behavior. You change the products that are already a part of their behavior. So electric cars do that. We're still driving the same car and everything. It's just that you're plugging it into the wall. There is some carbon footprint there, but you're not stuck. The only thing you're changing is you're not stopping at a gas station to put gas in your car, So you're not really asking people to do something that different. The change is in the wall outlet. So
Kai, I don't know if you know, but the New York Aquarium just fished out of the ocean its very first plastic fish that it evolved as a plastic. I'm just kidding.
I wouldn't have doubted it for a second, because every
it's made
time
entirely of plastic. It evolved to survive in the plastic, in this plastic world.
My brother and I will go fishing off of our wing foil boards. So we'll have kind of a hand line off of our harness, and we'll go out And we know where kind of the holes are for, I guess, what people know as like GTs, or in Hawaii, they're aluas. They're these really like, they're kind of scarier fishes than sharks. Ironically, there's these bullets underwater. But if you do bring them out, a lot of times if you look in the stomach, there's plastic in it. And I'm like, if it's breaking down, it's going into their cells.
Yeah, exactly. Well, everything is, they say you are what you eat, but everything is what it eats.
I mean, I don't doubt that nature will be able to figure out a way to just eat plastic, and it'll become a food source, and it'll be like metabolized, and it'll be like perfectly fine for everything else, because nature always finds a way. We just might be destroyed before then.
We'll all be long dead by the time nature gets around to that.
And then everything will reset again.
Exactly.
So Kai, just to land this plane, do you have any questions for me?
Neil, I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to keep it down to a couple. I'm looking for the biggest surfable wave on a planet, ideally in our solar system, but if it's at least within the local galaxy. I need basically light speed soon, so we can go surf other planets. And
so here's the thing. Earth is the only object in our entire solar system that has surface water. And you're surfing water. So the moon Titan of Saturn has oceans of liquid methane.
Ooh.
So it's liquid, but
not the right liquid.
No, there are several moons that have water oceans beneath a frozen surface, and it does get tidal stressing to it, but the surfaces are all completely frozen over, and you get some ice geysers where the water punches through, freezes on the way out, and then you get these sort of ice geyser, ice volcanoes. But
like in Enceladus.
Right, exactly. But right now, Earth is the best you got. That's all.
Yeah,
that's all
I figured in our solar system, it was just really watching that film Interstellar and seeing those waves that
Oh, you got spoiled. Okay, those are black hole waves, dude. Okay, so we send you down there. You can surf this like tidal wave for a black hole, near a black hole, but your time slows down, and all the people waiting for you up at the spaceship, you live 15 minutes and they live 20 years. Nobody's waiting for your ass to surf that wave.
Totally. I mean, I was like, that is the most surfable wave I've ever seen. I don't know how one of the characters died, because I'm like, it's easy. You just would ride it, and as you get to the top, I could understand he probably got flicked 1,000 extra feet above that thing, with all that wind at the top. But last 10 feet, you got to duck through it, and then you'll just pop out the other side.
It's easy because your name is Kai Lenny. That's why it's easy.
True.
Who's talking here?
Yeah.
But, another thing, too, is like we're constantly trying to find other big waves around the world, because like there can't only be 5 of these gigantic places, where everything sort of lines up. I don't tend to believe that. For example, Nazaré is in Europe. It's in Portugal. Like it's in sort of the backyard of Western civilization. And it was only surfed 13 years ago, like when it was big, like people sort of discovered it. And you're like, this place, this mythical place was kind of like, it's been around for as long as humans have ever known. But before there at Nazaré, it was considered, a death sentence and not a place that you would go ride a wave. But that has me always thinking, like, I'm constantly on Google Earth trying to find places to surf. But if the image of, you can't see below the surface, right, from on the Google images. Not
on Google, but we have the means of doing that, though. But yeah.
Yeah, so it's like trying to, obviously, if you could see the right position, the bathymetry and stuff, like, I guess on Google Earth, unless a photo is taken of a place with a wave, you kind of don't understand a wave could actually be breaking there.
So it sounds like what you really want to do is ask yourself, and we do this in physics all the time, given all these parameters that are creating this effect, how do I increase that effect? All right, what do I have to change about the wind, the direction, the water, the elevation, all of this? So what would be really cool is if you folk just ask yourself, how do I maximize a wave on this earth? Then get a whole bunch of money together and create the surfing environment with the and have a wave generating thing that's out there, or have a waves find some way to maximize it. You get 100-foot wave.
That's what we want, the mythical 100-foot wave. That's the dream. And
I don't see why you can't just put in the equations what will maximize it.
Build it
and then
plastic.
build it. Just build it. Why
So-
wait for nature to come together with weird configurations? Do it.
Kelly Slater's wave pool is probably the tallest man-made wave that it's like surfable.
And we talked about that in one of our episodes, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, we did. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and that whole project was like, I think somewhere 60 to 70 million, and they got away. That was, I mean, they were inventing sort of the technology. Now that it's a little more established, I've been the one, I'm like in Kelly's ear, I'm in all those people's ears constantly. I'm like, you guys, we need at least a 30-foot face wave, because if you had that, you would like that wave changed the landscape of surfing. But if you had a 30-foot wave, we would completely reinvent how we ride a big wave, because now all of a sudden you have something to train on. And
Yes.
5 days a year.
Completely not waiting for random nature to give you something that might be good.
But this is exactly about manipulating how to create bigger waves in the ocean. You know, not geostorm engineering or anything like that. Don't worry, people. But
It's
getting
like
to
not
the
Bond
swell
villain
heights,
stuff.
You're not
So-
Bond villain. Right.
the last thing I really would talk about is the swell height. So the biggest swell I think ever recorded was by Ireland, and it was like a 70 or 80-foot tall swell, and that was like a big deal. And I was thinking I could ride that on a hydrofoil. You know, that's probably, I mean, to get out there is kind of the hard part, because there's probably like, you know, millions of breaking giant swells, you know, that it's a constant chaos. But you totally could ride one of those on a foil and probably be less dangerous than going to, say, a place like Nazaré. But there's this guy that I got linked up with who created a drone, and he was ocean scientist, oceanographer, and he created a drone that sends a signal and bounces off the water.
Oh.
And he went to, I'll have to send you the link to one of his videos. It's funny because sometimes, you know, like social media and all that, there could be videos that are so big and like like people get so many views. And then there's these other videos that get like 400 views. And it's of something that's so mind-blowing to me, at least, you know. He made this drone, went to Nazaré, and he was bouncing a signal off of the water to see the swell height. Because Nazaré, I would say, out of all the big waves in the world, is the most unique that I've been to, in that there's a 10,000-foot trench that goes all the way to the sand on one side. And then there is basically on the other side, this sand point, you know, this ancient kind of lighthouse is sitting on top of. And it's like the swell energy is going the opposite direction and gets stuck in the trench, and it wraps back in. And one side of the beach, so Praia del Norte is where the wave breaks, and the south side of that beach, it could be like a ripple. I'm not even joking, a ripple. And on the other side, it could be 80-foot waves. And you're like, it doesn't make sense, but it does, because it's 10,000 feet of water there, and then, 50 feet of water over here. But so he flew the drone out over, and he wasn't even trying to record people riding waves. He just wanted to test his drone, and he was bouncing the signal off the water. And the waves we don't go for and we miss he was recording 70 feet of vertical height off of these swells. And he has it mapped down to I think it's down to like a millimeter of accuracy with his drone.
Mhm.
And I think the reason why it's possible for a place like that to get that big of waves is it's this wedge effect. You have the trench.
So this is important data if you're going to try to do this perfectly, right? I mean,
yeah. So it's like the wave is coming in the trench, the main predominant swell, and then the biggest waves at Nazaré don't break the farthest out. They actually break the closest in. So what happens is you're always looking for a wave where there's one wave coming this way, and it's basically a rogue wave. Another wave comes out of the north, and then it hits and it doubles up. So all that energy has to go somewhere. It creates this rise. So I already think people have ridden 100-foot waves, maybe bigger, 120-foot waves, because the waves he was recording, it was not even a big day out there. And I'm like, dude, people have had to have ridden taller waves, but we've yet to see. Hopefully this winter, I can convince him to fly his drone when it's really big over one of the waves I ride.
Well, if the weather events get more dramatic, you'll be getting bigger waves for sure.
Indeed.
Hey Neil, what were the biggest waves in all of time in the solar system?
Well, you want it to be around when the moon formed. The moon. So Earth was sitting there minding its own business in space, orbiting the Earth, and a Mars-sized protoplanet wayward wandered into the Earth, sideswiped us.
Excuse me, bro. That's what it said when it sideswiped. Excuse me, bro. So sorry.
Sideswiped us, past about 1% of Earth's crust into orbit around the Earth. So for a while there, Earth had a ring, okay? And that ring rapidly coalesced, because if you're a big piece, you have slightly more gravity than another piece. And so it'll win in the who wins the gravity and who attracts other small pieces contest. And that accreting of the material became Earth's moon. Now, all evidence, all theories of this formation say that the moon formed 20 times closer to Earth than it is right now.
Ooh.
Tidal forces go as the cube of a distance. Okay? So, Chuck, do you have a calculator?
I can get one.
Take 20. Take 20. You got one?
Yep.
Multiply it by 20.
Okay, that's easy.
That would be 20 squared. That gets you what?
400.
Now multiply by 20 again. What do you get?
8,000.
8,000. When the moon formed, it raised tides on Earth that were 8,000 times higher than today.
I can't even imagine. It must have been chaos around here.
8,000 times higher. So it sounds like you and your peeps want to go. If you had a time machine.
We need the Death Star. Well, a wave star.
Yeah,
it might be the Death Star for everyone that is by the wave.
The strength of tides is very sensitive to the distance to the moon. Distance is a very sensitive indicator of the tides. When we invent time machines, that's where you want to go. Okay.
I kind of wonder if I've already been.
Oh, he's reincarnated.
No, I wonder if I've already been, because my future self made the time machine and I've already gone back in time.
Oh, right. You know what that reminds me of? During the Science March, back in 2020? No, 2017. It was during the Science March on Washington. Someone had a sign that says, "What do we want? A time machine. When do we want it?" It doesn't matter.
It's true. It doesn't matter. Any time would be good.
Any time works for a time machine. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, another wave that, talk about meeting the environment in a big wave is this one time I was down in Patagonia with these two Navy SEALs on a Red Bull trip, and we were mountaineering and we were climbing two mountains that had never been climbed before. Ironically, one was named Shark Fin because it looked like a giant shark fin. But we were walking, and I felt like I was Frodo in the Fellowship of the Ring.
Oh,
it was just like this most crazy trip of my entire life. It was a defining moment, 2013. And I was walking across, we were walking across this kind of mountain, and there was this like glacial lake at the bottom. And there was this massive glacier. It's probably since receded, I don't know, a mile. But I was standing there or we were walking, and I looked down. And all of a sudden, I saw a piece of this ice fall into the water.
Oh.
And it displaced all this water. And all of a sudden, this perfect wave on this little, I think it was like a sediment deposit underwater. It was like a mound, a seamount, like there's waves like Cortez Bank that break off California. It's like a seamount, makes giant waves. This wave broke. And it was the most perfect wave ever. Glassy. There's no currents. It was just...
Plus, when the glacier calves like that, it looks like it's almost in slow motion.
Yeah.
And so you're not even thinking that there's much energy there until you watch it manifest as a wave, and you say, I better get my ass out of there if you're in some kind of rowboat.
The cool thing about that whole experience was I was predicting that wave was 15 feet high, and I thought maybe, because in comparison to the side of the glacial wall, I'm like, that's a 50-foot wall. I asked our guide that was from Patagonia down there, I'm like, how big is that glacial wall? Because we were going to go into ice climbing it later that day, like on the safer side. And he's like, that's 250 feet.
Yep.
And I was like, okay. So that wave, by my rogue calculation, was around 50 feet tall.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was a perfect wave, probably one of the most perfect waves I've ever seen in my life. It barreled down to about like an inch. It just kept barreling.
And the water is 32 degrees, just to remind, just to be clear. Okay.
Yeah. Good wetsuits.
No Hawaii, 70 degree, 75 degree. No.
I get the wind chill here in Hawaii, but when you don't get the wind chill.
Hawaiian wind chill. I feel so sorry for you.
Spoiler, no one's going to give you any sympathy.
Yeah, I don't need any.
Good.
That's the
Good.
key. I don't need it.
I don't need that.
Guys, we got to end it there. Kai Lenny, thanks for being on StarTalk. Neil deGrasse Tyson here, your personal astrophysicist. Keep looking up.